Oh, we've got one more coming in, Adrian Hawkins. I'll let him in. Save our green belt.
Thanks.
Good morning, Louise.
Morning.
You're now live.
Thank you for that. Okay, good morning, everyone. It is now 9 o'clock, and so I resume the hearing. I don't think that we have anyone joining us this morning that hasn't joined us at some point or other before, so I won't go through my full sort of opening. But just in terms of the use of Zoom, then I think the most important thing to know probably is, generally speaking, if you could keep your microphone switched off, on mute, apart from when you're speaking, obviously, but keep your camera on. I'd be grateful, unless you don't want to have your camera switched on, in which case that's also absolutely fine. Are there any sort of procedural questions or housekeeping matters to catch up on before we turn immediately to the agenda for this morning? I can't see anyone suggesting that there are, so that's great. In which case then, let us turn directly to matter 23, and that's issue 23, excuse me, issue 23.2. The Greenbelt Review update arrives at some different conclusions to that of the original Greenbelt Review. Some sites are now considered to make a significant contribution to the purposes of including land in the Greenbelt, which were previously assessed as making a lesser contribution. And you'll see that I've set out there two questions. I think in terms of our discussion this morning, that they can most usefully be combined. Yeah, I just want to be absolutely clear that these questions are about the change in the assessment. We've already, albeit a while ago, but we have already had a significant amount of discussion about the original assessment and the outputs from that. So this discussion this morning then is solely about the outcomes of the change in the assessment. And if I can ask everyone to focus their contributions on that issue, please. So as I say, I think A and B can both most usefully be combined. And in essence, really, the question is whether or not the change in the assessment of the land parcels and or sites should lead to a change in the local plan. I'll turn to the council in the first instance. I don't know if that's for you, Mr. Smith. The council, I know, says no, it shouldn't lead to any change in outcome. But if you could explain for everyone's benefit and understanding why you take that position.
Certainly, thank you, sir, and good morning, everyone. As you've correctly identified, the council has set out that notwithstanding the change in the assessment, then all of the affected sites should continue to be allocated. And that's referenced in our matters statement and also in the paper B that we were referring to yesterday, and probably best to refer to paper B in the first instance. And paragraph 27 there identifies the 11 sites or parts of sites, land parcels that we now say on the basis of the revised analysis have this uplift in contribution. And to summarise those down, that affects 5 of the strategic sites in the plan. Let you get your papers straight.
Yeah, thank you. So you said para 27?
That's right, yeah, on page 15 of paper B.
Thanks.
So you can see from that listed out are the sites impacted by this uplift in assessment. And as I was saying, that is affecting 5 of the proposed strategic sites in the plan, the proposed safeguarded land to the west of Stevenage, and site GA1, which is the largest single non-strategic allocation in the plan. And the following paragraph sets out why that uplift has come about, which essentially is because these are the largest sites, then obviously introducing a potentially significant volume of built development onto those sites has the largest impacts.
Yeah.
And there's a quote in there from the Greenbelt Review, which I won't read in full. Now, clearly, you need to give very significant weight to that harm in the balancing exercise. But our view is that there are also very significant benefits arising from these sites. And therefore, the exceptional circumstances remain. And to summarise those, and these are factors that really apply across pretty much all of those areas, perhaps with the exception of the safeguarded land, which is a slightly different circumstance because we're not proposing it for allocation now. Within paper B, obviously we've listed out the kind of detailed exceptional circumstances for most of the sites. The exceptional circumstances in relation to Luton are set out in paper C. And for the safeguarded land in paper D, which are the papers we submitted to you at the tail end of last year in response to your July letter. But in broad terms, and so this is applicable to all of these in a way, all of these sites are obviously strategic scale, or in the case of GA1, very large sites adjoining the main towns, which obviously we say, with regards to the settlement hierarchy, are the most sustainable locations for development. They accord with advice in paragraph 52 of the MPPF, which states that planning for large-scale developments can be a positive way of addressing your identified needs. These sites make strategic scale contributions to identified housing needs, and in the case of east of Luton, Luton's unmet housing needs. They make strategic scale contributions to overall supply. And in the context of the need and the requirement figures that the council has identified and says is sound, they're essential to maintaining 5-year supply over the plan period. And our view is that non-greenbelt constraints on those sites are capable of mitigation, and where appropriate, those mitigation measures are clearly set out in policy.
When you say non-greenbelt constraints, what kind of thing are you talking about there?
We're talking about issues like incorporating woodland blocks sensitively, addressing surface water flooding. In some of them, there's local wildlife sites either in or adjoining the sites, sensitively designing to address any heritage impacts, the sorts of issues that we went through at the Matter 10 hearings when you asked us about them.
I'm just wondering if you're straying from today's discussion, because I wouldn't want you to set a bad example.
Understood. I think in terms of their assessment and how it relates back to Greenbelt is, obviously we've based a lot of our positions on the steps in the Calverton judgment that we went through when we first did the hearings. I think one of the key elements in that is understanding to what extent harms can be ameliorated or mitigated. So we can tie it back to sort of Greenbelt, and it's part of the exceptional circumstances case that where there are harms, and we acknowledge there are harms and impacts of these sites, that we can mitigate those, which in turn ties back to the points we were raising last week about good master planning and asking for your permission for another attempt at just bolstering those requirements to ensure that where there are specific issues that need to be addressed, they are done so properly. And so in the council's view, as a matter of planning judgment in these instances, as I said at the outset, notwithstanding the uplift in assessment, we think the benefits of these sites are sufficient to tip the balance. All of the sites which have significant impacts on the Greenbelt also have significant benefits. In the council's view, there's not a mismatch. We're not proposing sites which would have significant harm where there would only be moderate benefits, for example. So in the council's view, just to conclude and possibly repeat myself, yes, notwithstanding the change in the assessment.
My apologies. Yeah, just on a point of clarification, you say all sites that make a significant contribution to the Greenbelt also have significant benefits in terms of the supply required to meet need, including in relation to the rolling 5-year housing land supply, as I understand it. Is that all sites with that make a significant contribution, or are we talking about the ones that are now significant but previously weren't?
It would apply across all of the sites, in that there was a small number of sites in the original assessment and in the original hearings which were significant impact, which is the other strategic site and one of the sites at Nebworth. I mean, obviously your hearing today is focused on the ones where there's an uplift, so it applies across the one where there's an uplift, as I say, with the exception of west of Stevenage, because plainly we're proposing that for safeguarding, having regard to national policy, which says we should look to longer term requirements as well. So plainly that site is safeguarded pending a future review showing that it's required. So clearly that one isn't contributing to 5-year supply and housing needs in this plan period.
And there is a change, just while we're on the point about the proposed safeguarded land to the west of Stevenage, there's been a change in that assessment.
Yeah.
The council considers that now makes a significant contribution.
Yes. Again, as I say, it's probably best, and we don't need to refer to it now, but paper D again sets out the circumstances there, particularly paragraph 12, where we refer you back to some homework that came out of the original hearing sessions, which relates to evidence suggesting that housing needs likely persisting beyond 2031. Clearly we don't get to 2031 and fall off a cliff in terms of households forming and so on, that both ourselves and potentially our neighbours, notably Stevenage, already have significant pressures in identifying sites for this plan period. Stevenage in particular is a constrained authority, and although we haven't made any commitment that site would be for their needs, that's a future discussion. Plainly, we consider that between our future needs and the future needs of other authorities in the housing market area, there's a strong likelihood that site is going to be firmly in the mix when we come to plan review, and therefore, under the guidance of the NPPF with regards looking to the longer term and safeguarding land, we consider that the case still stands for removing that land now.
Just on that point, then the point about the proposed early review and the policy that the council hasn't yet but is going to draft. Will that include reference to the land west of Stevenage, or should it include reference to the land west of Stevenage?
It can do. I think policy SP8, as proposed to be modified, does already address that point in that it identifies the safeguarded land and makes the point that that isn't allocated now and is subject to a future review. But certainly in either the policy we are yet to submit to you and or its supporting text, there's merit, I think, isn't there, in a cross-reference between the two facts there, that this is a specific matter that's addressed elsewhere in the plan that clearly falls to be considered as part of that process.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not for me to decide the detail, if I can put it that way, of the review itself, because they're in that we're talking about, you know, a future plan. But it strikes me that there are two aims or aspirations that the council has in relation to future development beyond this plan period. One being the aspiration for a new settlement, and the other clearly being the safeguarded land. And I wonder if those two things should have specific reference in the review policy as a result.
Certainly, we're happy to incorporate that. As I say, they're both matters that are identified in the text of the plan, both as submitted and as proposed to be modified. So I don't think there's an issue with pulling that up into the policy itself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I interrupted you and put you off your stride. My apologies.
No, I think I was pretty much there as an opening salvo. I walked you through the key points. Unless there's anything else you wanted to raise at this point, we're happy to sort of cede the floor and then come back later on in today's session.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bolton. You're on mute, Mr. Bolton.
Oh, I am. Sorry about that. I thought I'd click that. Just on the point of the review policy, sir, which you were discussing, I understand why you may wish to refer to safeguarded land and new settlement. If you are going to, can I suggest that consideration is given to the precise wording, because it may be at the review that there are other more sustainable alternatives than a new settlement. I mean, because that's not really being debated. The future of a new settlement as if you like the most appropriate way of meeting the longer term needs in 5 years' time hasn't, I think, really been fully debated, has it? So to put that in stone now, I think would be incorrect. I'm not saying one should reference it as an option.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm not here to examine a plan that the council hasn't yet produced. One that's a number of years, well, 2024, I think, was the kind of timeline that the council is looking at, if I recall correctly. So yes, it is not for me, or it's not for this plan to set in stone what the next plan will do, because that would be to predetermine the next plan, and that is not the role of this plan. But it seems to me that the review policy, given that the council has told me that it has specific aspirations in relation to a new settlement, and that it is proposing to safeguard land specifically for the purpose of future development, that those two things probably ought to be referred to in the review policy.
Yes, I think that makes sense, sir.
Mr. Watts.
Yes, thank you, sir. By the very nature of who I've been appointed to attend today, Mr. and Mrs. Barrow and a number of residents living on the southern side of Codicot, in respect to site CD1 land south of Cowards Lane, my comments are going to relate to that site. Now, the council, through its review of the Greenbelt in 2018, didn't change the status of the site in terms of its contribution to the Greenbelt. And it would appear that that's largely on the basis that it's a small site which wouldn't have much of an impact, as they describe it, on their pro forma, which I've copied in Appendix 3 to our representations dated March 2020. In the body of our representations, we did query the assessment that was made with respect to their conclusions on visual openness, quality of the boundaries, the contribution to this settlement, and topography and landscape and other issues. And we strongly feel that land south of Cowards Lane, site CD1, should move to having a significant contribution to the Greenbelt, notwithstanding its limited size in terms of other larger strategic sites that are proposed to be removed from the Greenbelt. This site makes a major contribution to the Greenbelt. It's on rising land, it's open, it adjoins an important wildlife site. There are other significant constraints.
Mr. Watts, my apologies. Could you, admirably speedy delivery, but
Sorry.
Just hang fire a moment while I catch up.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies, sir.
Okay.
And because of those reasons, we feel strongly that the site should be moved to a site which has a significant contribution to the Greenbelt, notwithstanding its limited size. The planning application which the developer has put into North Herts is being held in abeyance. For how long, we don't know, but that already proposes 83 houses. I don't know quite how they're going to be accommodated on this site, but the density is very high. I contrast the contribution that the council concludes this site makes to the Greenbelt, which is moderate, which appears to be the same contribution that at the other end of the village, Codicot Garden Centre off the High Street, they've also concluded makes a moderate impact. Now, I can't see how you can bring those two conclusions together. The garden centre site is previously developed. There are a number of buildings and glass houses, a large area of car parking, a commercial use. It has permission for housing. And to conclude that that site makes a moderate contribution, which is similar to the conclusion for CD1 Cowards Lane, does seem to fly in the face of common sense. So I would ask the council, through you, sir, to urgently review the contribution that this site makes to the Greenbelt and move it from moderate to significant, because that would truly reflect the role that it plays for villagers, people living in Codicot at that far end. Thank you, sir.
Did you say, Mr. Watts, that the garden centre has planning permission for housing?
I believe that there's a resolution to approve a development there, is there not? Well, that's strange, because I believe there's a pre-application consultation that was undertaken with the council, which, although in confidence, did allude to the fact that they were going to give consent, and that the second phase of development at the garden centre was not likely to be given consent because it was in a more open setting. Now, that maybe Nigel can confirm the position for us and clarify that. But regardless of the status of planning permission, it seems to me that there are clear differences in the physical characteristics of the two sites and the role that they respectively play in Greenbelt purpose and fundamental aim terms.
I don't know if you know the answer to that, Matt. As per my usual pattern, I'm not generally going to ask the council to come back on individual points as we go along, but rather to reply towards the end of the discussion. But just on that specific point, just as a matter of fact, Mr. Smith, can you shed any light?
Yeah, there is no planning consent on that site, similarly to Mr. Watt's client's site, or the site Mr. Watt's clients are objecting to. There is a planning application lodged with the council, but no decision or resolution has been made on that.
Okay.
And so can I just come in here? We are now well beyond the scope of your 23.2. You were very careful to check Mr. Smith earlier when you were concerned that he was going beyond that scope. The purposes of today's session, as I understand it, is not to revisit where there have been no changes in the assessment. Because if you're going to allow that sort of discussion, we're going to be here for a very, very long time. And can I just ask you, sir, just to make it clear to the representatives, the purpose of today's discussion, which is to consider where there have been differences, not where there is a complaint that there haven't been any differences and that the assessment has remained the same. As I understand it, that's what you want assistance on.
You are right,
Yes.
and yes, you beat me to the point. We have had a lot of discussion about the previous assessment, and because this is about, in essence, what this session is about, is my probing the council's conclusion that even though the change in the assessment for some sites has led them to move from being moderate to significant, that it still remains, well, that there is still a basis for the council to claim or demonstrate that exceptional circumstances exist. In relation to other sites, we have already considered those at great length. So this is about me probing the council's evidence in relation to the changes, rather than to consider those things that haven't changed.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, sir, but it does seem to me that you have the opportunity in having that discussion and taking views, that when you visit sites such as Cowards Lane and other sites to assess what, in your view, is their true impact and what contribution those sites make, you can take a view as to whether the council's review has been reasonable or not, or whether it underplays certain contributions. So my discussion with you was really in that context.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I have visited sites, and I will be visiting sites again as well.
Thank you, sir. It's reassuring.
Mr. Williams.
So thank you very much. I thought it might be helpful at this stage to summarise our position. You do, of course, have our hearing statements, and we've supplied hitherto a large amount of evidence in support of the allocations to the east of Luton. But your focus here today, as you've reminded us, is on the changes in the Greenbelt Review assessment. And it's about those that I want to speak about, conscious that you will have some opportunity again to look at our hearing statements. And it is a detailed matter, and it does require some scrutiny. And I would invite you to look at Mr. White's hearing statement in particular, so that you feel properly appraised of our points, which we make on the updated Greenbelt Review. I should furthermore emphasise that I'm not going to repeat evidence in relation to the exceptional circumstances that apply to east of Luton. You have more than enough evidence on that matter. Suffice it to say that we support the local authority's position in relation to that unmet need. And we're particularly concerned about the extensive examination process, because the need becomes, in short, more and more acute. So to turn to the focus of your session this morning, so we would ask you to look carefully at our analysis, and the conclusion we ask you to reach is that there is no necessity or justification or good reason to depart from the finalized results in the Greenbelt Review, that is the original one. In that respect, we align ourselves to a large degree with the submissions made yesterday on behalf of Luton Borough Council. So in summary, the points are these, and I'm going to divide the summary points into three categories. First, the strategic parcel, number 2. I think that's how you will be familiar with it. Then the sub-parcels 2C and 2D. And then in relation to the allocation sites, EL 1, 2 and 3. I hope that's a logical and clear way of dealing with the three categories of assessment. So very briefly, in relation to the first, that is strategic parcel number 2, the overall contribution to Greenbelt purposes is increased in the updated Greenbelt Review. However, the only change in this respect is that the visual dimension of openness is now made explicit in relation to the purpose of safeguarding the countryside. The updated Greenbelt Review says in terms that the visual dimension was taken into account in the Greenbelt Review, and explains that it was out of prudence that the updated version should explicitly refer to it. You'll see this is the same point that Luton Borough Council made yesterday. So on that basis, and where nothing has changed on the ground, there appears to be no good reason for the change in contribution. So you will note here, please, that the commentary in Table 4 of the updated Greenbelt Review remains the same. So for these reasons, the original Greenbelt Review appears more reliable in this respect. I turn to the sub-parcels 2C and D to the east of Luton, and Table 5.
Bear with me just for a moment.
I will say, I apologise.
Okay, where were you taking me, Mr. Williams?
To the next category, sub-parcels 2C and 2D, and the reference there in the updated review, I think, is Table 5. Now here's, it is of some significance. We all appreciate that looking at a very large area of land, in other words, strategic parcel number 2, any conclusions there cannot be read down to smaller areas of land. That's not logical, and it's not good planning. They look at different areas where different circumstances arise. In subparcels 2C and 2D, which are of a smaller scale, you will note that the overall contribution to Greenbelt purposes is unchanged. And this appears to support the view that there has been no change on the ground between the two assessments that should warrant any change in judgment. So the third and final category, in order to assist you in understanding the updated review and how much weight, as it were, to place on the changes made in the overall results. The allocation sites to the east of Luton, and the relevant table is Table 8. So in this respect, the updated review says that the overall contribution is increased from moderate to significant. Now, in this respect, we do not agree with the judgments made. And there are 5 points which we ask you to bear in mind by way of summary. Appreciate you will look at this, but we ask you to look closely at our analysis in order to reach your own independent judgment here. First, nothing has changed on the ground to alter the nature of the sites and their context. Secondly,
If you bear with me just for a moment. Yeah.
Secondly, the assessment results for the individual green belt purposes do not change for sites EL1 and EL2. And the only difference is in one respect for EL3. Yet, the overall contribution increases in all cases, notwithstanding that. That does more than simply raise an eyebrow. It requires some further examination. The third point is this, that the updated Greenbelt Review changes the assessment from one based on current land, you refer, the reference is as is, to one based now on an assumption of some theoretical significant development. Now, there's 1 or 2 points to make on that. The first is that the comparison with the Greenbelt Review, therefore, is not like for like. There's no clear explanation of the reason for the change in approach. And there's no explanation at all as to what assumptions have led to the difference. You will recall being reminded yesterday that the Sam Smith case related to a proposed extension to mineral extraction, which was a development proposal. It was a planning application where it was necessary to consider the impacts of that specific development in terms of its details. But that is not the exercise here. The exercise here, with the focus on a change to results, is on the contribution that the existing land makes to the Greenbelt. Importantly, in relation to this second point, that approach has not been adopted for other land not proposed as allocations in the draft plan. So the third point
Fourth point.
I beg your pardon, sir. Yeah, classic error. The next point is that the updated Greenbelt Review makes the assumption that sites most closely associated with the main urban areas make the most significant contribution to Greenbelt purposes. And it appears, it is suggested, we may be wrong, that this has influenced the scoring.
If you bear with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't consider that that presumptive approach, and it is applied as a general presumption, is correct. There's no reason to assume as a generality that a site or sites divorced from the urban edge would, in overall terms, perform better than a site next to the urban edge. Indeed, logic might point the other way, that a site divorced from the urban area might well contribute more to openness than one closer to the urban area. Indeed, a number of sites divorced from the urban area might give rise to a clear presumption of even greater effects. But it is the general presumption that's wrong. It would be more fair and more correct, therefore, to assess each parcel of land on its individual merits, having regard, of course, to all the circumstances, including size, location, and local context, including topography and vegetation and woodland, as was done in the Greenbelt Review. And the last point here, sir, is this, and it ties in with the point I've just made about topography, vegetation and woodland and so on. And I appreciate you've been to the land around the east of Luton, so you will readily appreciate the point. In relation to the visual dimension of openness, the updated Greenbelt Review does refer to the containment of views, expressly so, because of the topography and the vegetation. And yet it's our view that that has not properly been reflected as a matter of judgment in the overall assessment on contribution. The topography and the woodlands in that particular area do have an important role to play, and more weight should be given to them than is given in the updated review document. And so it's for those reasons, sir, that we ask you to look carefully at the changes to which you're focusing today. And we would strongly recommend that you reach the conclusion that in actual fact, they're not properly arrived at, that the judgments should remain as were reached in the Greenbelt Review. Now, I appreciate, so in one sense, that's at least for our part, entirely academic, because the exceptional circumstances, even if you were to arrive at the conclusion of significance, compel you, we would say, to the ultimate answer that there are not just exceptional circumstances in this case to warrant the allocation in support of the local plan, but indeed a compelling case that becomes more and more urgent as time goes by. So for those reasons, it may be that there's something to reply to at a later stage today, but I hope it's helpful to summarise the position and ask you accordingly to look carefully at our hearing statements on this matter.
Would it, Mr. Williams, in your view, be irrational or unreasonable for me to agree with the council and for the plan to be adopted on that basis?
So I've not suggested that there's any error of law in that respect. No, sir, I haven't. These are matters which go to the question of planning judgment. And it's our view that the judgments reached in the updated Greenbelt Review are not as reliable and we would ask you to prefer the judgments for the reasons I've given in the original review. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Ormsby.
So I think my hand is a legacy hand. So I don't know if you want to hear from Mr. Deanwood in relation to those points, or whether you'd like to hear what other people have got to say. But sorry, I should have taken my hand down.
No, it was your hand that prompted me to go
yes,
to.
Apologies.
Mr. Mr. Hutchinson? Can you hear me, Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes, thank you, sir. Right, as you're aware, so we act for a group of residents at Ickleford relating to the allocation of Burford Grange, Ickleford, which is site 40. In this respect, the Green Belt update now acknowledges that this site makes a significant contribution in respect of the merger of settlements. And that is in section ED 161A, page 21, sir.
My apologies, Mr. Hutchinson. I didn't catch the reference.
It's ED 161A, page 21.
Page 21. Thank you.
The accompanying site survey also confirms in ED 161B that the Burford Grange site within parcel 12A also makes a significant contribution in respect of safeguarding the countryside, and indeed the overall contribution is significant. Turning to page 15 of ED 161 in brackets A, this also confirms the contribution, including the overall contribution, to be significant. It's surprising, therefore, sir, that against that background, elsewhere in ED 161A, the overall contribution of the Burford Grange site is still indicated as moderate. And again, that's on page 21 of ED 161A. So it's our view that the overall contribution should now be recognised of Burford Grange as significant in Greenbelt terms. And in fact, I'd go further than that and emphasise that we consider it to be of the utmost importance that this site is retained in its present open form. Burford Grange is not a strategic site, and its deallocation would not impact unacceptably on the overall housing figures. We feel, so that if Ickleford is to retain its separate identity, we consider this allocation should be removed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Just on a point of clarification, Mr. Smith, would this be one of the sites that you would be looking at in the homework that you are going to do in terms of what is required in relation to the rolling 5-year housing land supply?
Yes, it would. And it's also a site, as Mr. Hutchinson has acknowledged, that was a moderate contribution and is unchanged at the moment. So strictly falls outside the scope of your question today.
Yeah, I wasn't, yeah. I don't have, well, I do have the paper next to me, but I didn't have the chance to look and work out precisely what was what as Ms. Hutchinson was speaking. So I wasn't clear about that during the discussion, but yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, thanks for that clarification. Mr. Griffiths, my apologies, yeah, Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I think it would be useful, sir, if you were to structure the discussion today from first looking at the more strategic sites, those 11 sites that are listed in the review, down to consideration of the smaller sites. I would find that useful. I think most people would. So starting from that premise, if I can just come back to the sites east of Luton, you might like to invite other contributions on that particular topic. I think it would be useful. Just going back to what we heard from Mr. Williams, and he said that nothing has changed on the ground. I welcome that, because of course nothing has changed on the ground, thanks to Greenbelt and countryside policies. But he said that nothing has changed in terms of the Greenbelt review. Clearly, the analysis is there for you to see in the tables which he mentioned. And certainly the conclusion of this fine-grained approach, the more detailed approach to Greenbelt, which CPRE welcome, I think has produced, I think, a more clear-cut result in looking at sub-parcels rather than the parcel as a whole. I think what you've got there, I think, is obviously a more useful analysis, which I hope will guide you, sir, in the conclusions which you have to make. And certainly, I think we would support the conclusions of the Greenbelt Review. And I think you can see that one of the principal reasons for the increase in significance, if you look at figure 4.3 in the review, you will see safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. And that's one of the purposes of the Greenbelt, which I have mentioned last week.
When you say the review, Mr. Griffiths, do you mean the review update?
Greenbelt review update, yes, sir. And if you look at table 4.3, I think that's one of the aspects that's clear there, that in the parcels which Mr. Williams has mentioned, the safeguarding the countryside from encroachment is one of the purposes which is referred to in that review. But I would mention, I think, another couple of purposes which are fulfilled, perhaps not brought out in the review, but I think they're worth mentioning. One I mentioned yesterday was really this business about stimulating regeneration. And I think I believe that the fact that we have this strong greenbelt boundary on the eastern side of Luton has in fact led to the stimulation of development within the borough of Luton. And I think therefore that greenbelt purpose has been fulfilled. And I think the other one, obviously, was to contain the sprawl of large built-up areas, of which, of course, Luton is one. So I think it has protected the countryside east of Luton from Luton's sprawl into the surrounding countryside area. So I think we've mentioned this many times before.
Forgive me, Mr. Griffith. Yeah, I just want to be sure that you are still on the point about the change in the assessment.
Yes, I think I just want to mention that those should have been picked up, I think, in the assessment, those last two purposes. They seem to have focused on the encroachment on the countryside. I believe that it has been carried out fully. Mr. Dean would probably like to respond to that by the review. But I think I cannot stress enough the point about the encroachment on that tract of countryside. And Mr. Williams and his clients can bang on quite a lot about woodland and all that sort of thing. But
yeah, I'm having, Mr. Griffiths, a sense of deja vu in that we did talk about those sorts of things at length at the previous hearings.
Okay.
So I am this morning, this session, as I've underlined it twice and put a note on the bottom of my matters and issues questions, just to highlight the point, and that this is about the change in the assessment, because the wider issues, it's not that I'm ignoring them, it's simply that, and we've already discussed them at significant length.
Yeah, I appreciate that, sir, and you seem to have the points. But just to respond to Mr. Williams' last point, I think with all the evidence that you have now got, there's a compelling reason for you, in the light of this review and the other evidence, to reject the sites to the east of Luton. Thank you.
So in effect, you say, Mr. Griffiths, on the council's own evidence?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I think I might just take up Mr. Griffith's suggestion in terms of focusing on the strategic sites first of all, if that might help people. So, Dr. Ween, are you? I see you're next on the hands raised list that I have. Are you here to talk about strategic sites first of all, and the change in the assessment in relation to them or any one of them?
Yes, sir, indeed I am. In particular, BA1, which we haven't heard much about in the last day or so, and I want to sort of raise its profile a bit. One of the points I want to make at the start is that BA1 was only really able to progress in the first place because it had been rated as only moderate. I think if it had been significant from the start, we might have had a very different situation today. But the council managed to downgrade the assessment, and I don't want to revisit old history because I know you don't want to do that. But if I can just refer you to the explanation in my March 2018 submission that explained how the results had been rigged to get that assessment of moderate. The CPRE's submission also made some very similar points. What has now happened is that part of one of the packets of land has now been upgraded, and so effectively the whole site is now effectively rated as significant. Now, one of the contributors earlier made the point that nothing has changed on the ground. Well, absolutely, it hasn't changed on the ground. But the point I would make is that this is completely irrelevant if the original assessment was flawed, which it was. So where are we now? Well, we've got the BA1 is now significant in 3 of the 5 packets. Packets 21A and B mysteriously have not been upgraded, and I would very much like to invite you to come and have a look at those packets, because I walk them regularly and I can tell you that they are extremely valuable as a safeguard against bulldog sprawling out into the countryside. So I would very much appreciate it if you would like to revisit those sites. So I think we now actually, surprisingly, have common ground between myself and the council that this is a substantially harmful greenbelt site, because they actually refer to it as such in ED 172 on paragraph 21. So far as I know, we are all agreeing that this is substantially harmful in greenbelt terms. Now, when the packet 21C was upgraded to significant, the council's approach after all the upgrading had happened, and indeed some downgrading, was to use a lot of sort of an argument that was based on a lot of hand waving to claim that there was no significant change overall. But that basically doesn't discriminate between the big strategic sites, which had been changed, and the small sites that had been changed. It was just saying that overall it seems to come out about the same. But where you have a site as big as BA1 going up, that clearly is significant. You can't just wave them away by some sort of spurious averaging argument. But my final point is that even if all the greenbelt land in the local plan had been upgraded to significant, this would not have affected site selection, because the council actually states in paragraph 40 of ED 172 that, and I quote, "The fact that land may be judged as making a limited, moderate, or significant contribution to greenbelt purposes is not in itself an influence upon the outcomes of the appraisal process." So we can discuss whether it's moderate or significant as much as we like. The council's not going to change their mind. And that, I think, is wrong, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ween. Mr. Dorman, is this on an issue about a strategic site or sites in relation to the change in the
good morning, Mr. Bartley. Yes, it's specifically in relation to the East of Luton sites.
Okay.
And I will, I think, be very brief, actually. As we know, the East of Luton sites were reassessed as being significant for the purposes of the green belt. But we now have the situation explained by Mr. Williams on behalf of Bloor Homes in what I can only describe as a fine legal set of niceties that he now deploys to suggest that the reevaluation has not been correctly done. I really can't argue in the detail that he has done. I don't have the legal training, legal mind to do that. I'll have to leave that to others who are better qualified. But suffice it to say that I simply, on a matter of emotion, let alone anything else, don't agree with him. I think that the key, apart from those elements of the green belt, the key point here is that the exceptional circumstances have not been demonstrated. There is no unmet need from Luton, as we have amply demonstrated both in written and verbal form. And Mr. Williams talks, I'm going to quote here, he talks about the need, the unmet need from Luton has now becoming acute. I mean, can I be blunt? What planet are these people living on who are proposing these sites on the basis of there being no unmet need from Luton? At what point will they actively look at the hard evidence that we have presented both verbally and in written form? There is no unmet need, therefore there's no exceptional circumstance.
Yeah,
as a consequence,
Mr. Dillon, forgive me. I'm not going to have any sort of rerun about I know that it was mentioned in passing earlier. I appreciate that, but I'm not going to have any sort of rerun of the debate about whether there is or isn't unmet need in Luton. And as you know, there has already been a lot of evidence given to me about that, and there's also going to be more to come as well. So rest assured that I will be looking at all of that in detail.
Thank you. That's fine. My final comment purely is just to reiterate that to put on record that I think the East of Luton sites should be removed from the local plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dorman. Okay, in terms of then the strategic sites, I say, Ms. Cottier, I suspect that Ms. Cottier is going to want to talk about one or two of the strategic sites. Ms. Cottier, and yeah, if we can make sure that we're focused, as I'm asking everyone, to focus on the change in the assessment, please.
Yes, thank you. I just want to pick up on the point about the woodlands being valuable in the other moderate contributing land site just below. You can see that they're it's where it is. I'm looking at page 9 of 1.6 1B. So I'm looking at the patch of green in question, and then above that are the other two joined together patches. So the two things I want to say are, firstly, that there are in total 3 areas really if you break it into developments. We've got the Crown Estate area, which is called EL3, and then we've got the other 2 areas beside that, EL1 and 2. So, and then we have this other area that's been excluded early on in the process because it was deemed more valuable than the other site. But in fact, we're not really talking about one site in the significant contribution block. We're talking about 3. So and collectively they're much larger as well. So in a sense, there's more to lose when it's a larger area. I'm not saying I wish to lose the other one either, but I'm just making that comparison. And also, if we're going to apply spatial alterations, we have to apply them equally across the whole process. So if you've sort of moved one part of the benchmark at a later stage, you have to adjust all the others prior to that accordingly in balance with it, or you're going to end up with a lopsided input process. So you have to reevaluate everything in proportion to everything else when if it's going to remain balanced and logical. And so if you're forward engineering something, you've got to also back engineer it as well. So also the woodland point about there being valuable woodlands. Well, I'm looking at each spot and I'm comparing them, and there's a lot of history around this area generally, by the way. So the woodlands relate to are ancient woodlands, and they relate to this heritage there. And it might interest everybody to know that just on the Peters Green site, that's the one just below the airport, there's a place called Dane Street, and that actually marks where there used to be an ancient boundary between the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. And the side that was the Luton Airport side, that was the Anglo-Saxon area, and then the territory beneath Dane Street where the Vikings were. And interestingly, Brick Hill Wood over on the East EL2 and 1 sites, that's very, very ancient, and it was an ancient brickmaking works where they used to, because the soil around here is very clayey, and that's why it's always waterlogged, and that's why there is the need for the subterranean urban drainage systems, because it regularly becomes all waterlogged, and lots of ditches and things. So and the roads become also very watery. So that's definitely part of the terrain here. But what they did was they made use of this clay, and they have an ancient brick kiln there. They used to kiln the bricks and produce them, and that in turn is linked to another area which is not on this map, but it goes towards Butterfield Green, and that unfortunately it's been covered over with a large industrial unit now and an Inspire Sports Centre. But there used to be the oldest Roman house ever in Europe. It used to be it was the ruin of within Europe, one of the largest Roman residences ever found. So I think that probably the bricks for that were made at this kiln. And another interesting piece of information about this area, which I might, just for my own personal interest, research more, is that
if I can ask you to tie what you're going to
say. Point being about these ancient woods is they're more than just patches of trees. You know, they have a distinct connection to the terrain, and I'm not saying that the woods in the other area are any less valuable, but if we look at the number of woods, ancient woods, relating to this ancient heritage, it holds meaning for the area and it holds memory of the area. You can see that it's more, if you put it all together, there's a whole lot of ancient woodland on the EL 1 and 2 sites, and there is no, although the point was made that the woodland on the other area is also very valuable, and I'm not arguing that at all. If you look at how much woodland there is on the other area and compare it to that's on the strategic site, it's probably about 1/3. The strategic site is probably 2/3 more woodland, and the woodland has a story, as well as having ancient thing. And I am very, very afraid that what they're going to do is just build around it, and then it will all be all blocked in. And what I'm also not following the logic at all as to why we haven't counted Mangrove Green, Tea Green, and Cockenhoe as 3 entirely separate villages, even though because they have done that in other areas. And as far as checking the urban sprawling into the green area, what they're not actually, they're basically expanding the population of Cockenhoe and the other 2 villages by 1,000%. So how that checks in with containing urban spoilage, it's the absolute bipolar opposite of that it possibly could be, pointing in the most opposite end of the spectrum you can possibly go, because that is not checking urban spoilage.
Forgive me. Do forgive me. So yeah, no, I understand your points, and you've put them really well, and as you did at the previous sessions that we had. But can I ask? So because this morning, as I've said, is very much really drilling down on the issue of the change in the council's assessment here. So do you agree with the change in the assessment that the councils made? Do you think that they got it wrong before, but they've got it right now?
I think the original assessment could have been more detailed in the first place, because we then came to base our decisions on that, and also there were things going on in the general area or the area next door that were obviously going to impact the overall openness. Not to mention the setting in and of itself. So I don't think there was enough attention applied to the visual openness aspect of the OOMB, or the economic development that was in the adopted local plan at the time. That this is that the land directly next to it is an enterprise zone for within the adopted local plan, and as such they had plans to develop it, and these were also in the local plan as well, albeit slightly more moderate than what they've actually ended up passing. And this was all going on at the time of these reviews. So I feel that that should have factored into at least somewhere in consideration of how the two were going to interconnect. I think if you've got some new results, they should feed into what's the point of conducting a study and then to have some results if you're going to reject the results at the end just because you don't like the results of your own study. So I think, yes, in short, it should go into it.
Would I be right in thinking? I mean, because the council, as you know, are now saying that rather than making a moderate contribution to the green belt, in fact, these three sites make a significant contribution, i.e., you know, the highest level of contribution in their rankings. So I assume that that you would agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely makes a significant contribution. I think it was like 9,000 objections on the overall spatial issue at the beginning of Regulation 1819. A testimony to that's the overall feeling in the general area. It does make a significant contribution, or you wouldn't have gotten 9,000 objections just from one area alone.
Yeah. So in that respect, then I guess what you're saying is, well, to use a lot of paraphrasing here, well, it's taken them a long time, but thankfully they've got to the right place in terms of the actual assessment itself now. At least like they've I think they only upgraded one part of the site, didn't they? Because they originally, I was reading it, they split it into 3 originally. Because they've changed the names on it so many times. That's the problem. I've gotten written down here 2A equals EL3 and 2C and 2D. They were the greenbelt parcels equals EL1 and 2. And I remember during the outline stages of when the original consultations were going on, and there were greenbelt studies being done back then, they were being referred to as 2A, 2C and 2D, and I know that because a lot of my old submission statements refer to the land as that, and sort of people got a bit lost in that name changing. I think that's an important point, is that a lot of people who wanted to input into the various objection process, etc., that they got lost early on because the names were switched. So I think just as a point of councils and everyone generally, try and keep the names the same, because regular folk can't really follow it. And they just feel totally confused because they're not familiar with the process, that the planning engagement process oftentimes, and only very few people are then able to kind of manage to keep going with it, you know, and then you lose people along the way. So I think that yes, they did, but there was a lot of it was a bit of a struggle getting there, and I wish it would have been picked up earlier, because if it had been picked up earlier and used as an input earlier, we would have had different set of results to discuss before us. And who knows, it may have saved everybody a lot of time and energy. We've all learned a lot of things, I guess, along the way, and you can't put price on knowledge, can you, really? Okay, so the council has arrived at now, through the update, has arrived at a conclusion that you agree with.
In terms of calling the overall contribution as significant, but I would actually, if there was one higher, I would say I would put it one higher. I asked if, but there isn't, unfortunately. Significant plus.
Yes, okay. I thought you might say that. Okay. And then you were going to say, well, you did start to say, but then I interrupted and asked you a question. So, but you were going to say, I think, well, okay, they've now assessed it as being significant, and you were starting to say, I think, but in short, so what? Because that hasn't led to a different outcome, and that I think you were probably about to tell me that in your view that really should mean that those 3 sites are removed from the plan.
Yeah, I think that they should be favouring the options that, well, that they have for regeneration, which is part of the purpose of it being there in the first place. And we have a whole lot of opportunity to do that in Luton. And it's not only an opportunity, it's been actualised and it's gone ahead. And as the evidence, which isn't related to this matter, it will be brought forward at a certain point when it's in relation to a relevant matter. But yes, in short, I do think that these are extraneous to need. And therefore, if they were to have their purposes changed, there would no longer be any logic to the application of the idea and notion of regeneration in the first place. If you're going to set something up and say in a plan that you're going to do something, and that's the case with Luton's adopted plan as well as North Herts' submitted plan, if you're going to do something, do what you say you're going to do. Do make sure it does what it says on the tin, not say something and then go and do something else. And in the case of this, yes, to apply the significant contribution to the actual strategic site and then make sure that your words translate into actions and have a manifestation in a physical way. I do think, yeah, that would be more aligned with what they are actually saying in their plan policies about this. Well, and then next step is to acknowledge, perhaps publicly acknowledge, maybe even in writing acknowledge, the delivery of regeneration that you've already, I think, Mr. Jed from CPRE, I know his name's not, I call him Mr. Jed, Mr. Jed's point about regeneration, that Luton actually should be congratulated on the amount of regeneration of old properties that they have undertaken thus far, albeit they haven't publicly acknowledged or announced that's what they've done, and it doesn't seem to reflect in some of their documents, but it's certainly evidenced in the planning stuff. So yes, there is an alternative solution already happening. So why ignore something that's making a significant contribution and build all over it when it's making a significant contribution? I do think it would be irrational.
Okay.
It's so this greenbelt issue, it's sort of such an odd thing. I think that's why people struggle with it a little bit. It's so sort of abstract in some ways. It's sort of an odd dichotomy. On the one hand, we're talking about a spatial mass, but yet which we all can tangibly see and acknowledge and all the things within it. Yet in the other way, we're talking about something quite abstract. And I mean, I'm not sure if that's how they do it in planning, and but sometimes I feel all these words cloud the actual simple physical observable facts, and that's what I kind of prefer to stick with. I prefer to stick with the data, the facts, and yeah, sure, feelings come into it a bit, but actually ultimately you've got to be able to back up what you say with numbers. And however ornamental the legalese can be used, it still doesn't detract from the clearly plain, obvious, visible facts before us, and the fact that we can count 1, 2, 3, add them all up, and it comes to this number. And I wish there was sort of some kind of way that was put in the beginning, related to something perhaps abstract like greenbelt space. Is it significantly contributing? Yes, it is. And so are the housing regeneration numbers significantly contributing to move us in that direction rather than this direction, building on it. So
okay.
I think I've gone on a bit. Sorry, guys.
No, your position, Ms. Cloutier, is absolutely clear to me. So thank you for that. I'm going to give Mr. Rigg a go now. Mr. Rigg, can I just check? I'm looking to focus on strategic sites. So if I can just double check that you're going to be talking about one or more of the strategic sites, and just to sort of remind you that we're talking about the change in the assessment.
Yeah, I would be talking about NS1. I think the change in rating to significant warrants the site being withdrawn from the plan. Mr. Smith stated yesterday the SLA was based on realistic assumptions. Now, by way of history, NS1 comprises of two sites, NS and Site 353. NS, in conjunction with the Stevenage site HO3, was identified under the East of England plan in 2007 as suitable for the expansion of Stevenage. East of England went away, but the assumption or the aspiration for the development of that site remained. When you get to ED 161B, Appendix 3 on page 164, under the safeguarding criteria, this block of land is assessed as is on an as-is basis, ignoring the proposed development of the HO3 site. However, when you get to Appendix 4, page 295, the assessment is noted as requiring the development of HO3 to bring forth that site. So there would appear to be a contradiction within the document itself. And in both of those two appendices, they determined, and this is a change, a significant contribution to the prevention of merging of settlements, which previously there wasn't. And so in developing NS1, you'll have coalescence with Stevenage and Gravely, something I've spoken about previously. And given that the essential characteristics of the greenbelt are its openness and permanence, and the important functions which NS1 fulfills in terms of preventing unrestricted sprawl and safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, they're important. Now, the update was to encompass also openness and visualness. And essentially, if NS1 is developed, both openness and visualness will go. The development will dominate Gravely, leading to a loss of identity and character of the village. And finally, the importance of this site to local residents within North Herts, but also as far as places like Baldock for relaxation and exercise, has been heightened by this COVID. So I don't think that NS1 should be in the plan because it is contrary to the criteria of the Greenbelt. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rigg. I will hear from Ms. Hamilton, and then I'm going to take a break. So, Ms. Hamilton.
Good morning, Inspector. If I do deviate, just jump in there. Yes, the change in assessment should at least lead to critical reassessment at the sites offering a now significant contribution. And in the cases where sites have other contentious issues, they should be rejected. The more critical analysis in the Greenbelt Review upgrade is important, as some of the sites offer significant contribution on safeguarding the countryside and stopping urban sprawl. And these are two particularly important purposes of the Greenbelt. In regards to Greenbelt, when you look at a site such as east of Luton, You know, before, I mean, I'm getting quite old now. Before you could stand on the downs at the back of Dunstable and Luton, and way in the distance you could see countryside. You can do that now, and you can't. As far as the eye can see, Houghton Regis is imploded. The amount of development is vast, and even the bit of countryside far over in the northeast from there is going to be undertaken by Central Bed's new local plan. So in this regards, the stopping the urban sprawl and safeguarding that countryside, particularly in regards to east of Luton, is really, really important, because it's the only tiny pocket of countryside you can see for miles around. And this should be given quite considerable weight. I would like to do this slightly different. I've gone through the points that North Herts have made, and I would like to respond in regards to those, in particular with one of the sites, one of the strategic sites. I argue against some of their reasons to allow some of the allocations to remain. It does grieve me to look at the bigger picture and identify that although some of the sites offer a significant contribution overall, they don't have other impacts and issues that others do have, and I feel these should take priority. In my ideal world, no green belt would be built on. It was put there for a reason, and it's going to come to a point of time over the years and over each local plan that the amount of open space between urban areas is going to decrease so rapidly. At the end of the day, we're more than likely going to be conjoined. So we do need to put a weight on this green belt. Anyway, here we go. I'm going to give reasons why I disagree with some of the points that GA2 has been left in the plan. So in their plan B, North Herts have said, number 34, GA2 is critical to overall numbers achievable. No, that is not the case if ORS carried out a new calculation on a lower variant, or the OEN is dropped accordingly to the 2018 ONS. It can deliver a coherent new neighbourhood. No, it couldn't. Unlike GA1, you cannot say that this site would be coherent. It would be isolated from Great Ashby due to the continual woodland blocks that run the whole breadth of Great Ashby. And these go from Tarnkiln Wood, New Spring Wood, Bruches Wood, down to the strip that runs parallel with Cleveland Way. Even under the pylon line, you've got a small scrubland area with still some trees in it. So there is a definite edge to that. And it would be only conjoined by the access road and a bridle path at the other end of the development. It states it's kept in because it includes infrastructure provision. This, in regards to GA2, is for secondary school. No, a secondary school is not going to be located into GA2. They're looking at a totally different site for it. Even the developer admitted there would probably be the need for a site, but it'd be okay because he could add more homes. It also states there are no other non-greenbelt issues. I'm not going to go into this because we've already looked at this anyway. But 3 experts have questioned deliverability, and due to issues with the access road, cannot see a possibility of this being delivered, and also a possibility of a net gain, which goes against the MPPF and policies. I do see an issue with the greenbelt boundary in the GBRU. It states that well-established planting contains the urban edge currently. Yes, it does. It's called thick woodland blocks. And yet in the permanence section of the GBRU, it's classed as weak, with just a partial definition of woodland blocks. I do disagree with this statement, as it's continual. As I put in the submission, the lack of clear boundaries, once development is allowed the other side of the woodland blocks, is then going to cause serious problems, as there will be no definite boundary. So we move to section 22 of B in their response to your questions, Inspector. It stated that all sites met at least 3 criteria. I disagree with social infrastructure, as I've just pointed out in regards to the school. Great Ashby already has a bus route, so it's not like if GA2 was built, it would get a bus route. And I disagree to the point.
My apologies, Ms. Hamilton. Will you just bear with me one moment? I see. Okay, thank you.
So as far as the social infrastructure goes, we can't see any bearing. It's not like we're going to get arts and culture or recreational. The only thing we see from that is actually a loss of recreational space and space that provides well-being. We also disagree with the fact that it would make a substantive contribution to the 5-year delivery. In regards to environmental impact, a number of qualified people have questioned the deliverability, and delays regarding this would be extensive due to the issues. As it stands currently, only 50 homes are showing as being built in 2025, with 100 each year after. I'm not sure how that can be called a substantive contribution to the 5-year plan. There are a lot other sites that would be able to be delivered a lot faster. I reaffirm my point made yesterday in regards to Objective C, reducing the use of motor vehicles in line with policy. This would in fact increase with this site, both from people needing to go further to access open space after this has been removed, and in the fact that only yesterday it was highlighted how people in towns have not stopped using vehicles in favour of cycling. There was a huge government funding scheme to promote cycleways within towns. And this has proven that people have not gone, and we've seen this from Great Ashby, we've seen that people prefer to use their vehicles. And I would also like to point that Ashby was recently turned down for a grant for improvements to their few cycle routes, as the roads simply are too narrow to incorporate them. One of the reasons for the site to remain was that cycle paths contribute to the mobility scheme, and this is simply not the case. I'm nearly finished, please bear with me. I stand by the other points made on behalf of residents and Saving North Herts Greenbelt that were submitted on the 27th of Feb in relation to availability and Greenbelt, and hope these can be still taken into account. In this respect, we find the harm is greater than the benefits, so there are no exceptional circumstances in this instance to remove this site from the Greenbelt. In regards to the safeguarded land west of A1M that you did mention, as it also offers a significant contribution, I feel that it should be reassessed along with any other constraints in this respect. Moving on to your question B, I think you said that you wanted to do them together.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, this situation and the GBRU does render the plan unsound, as by assessing sites more critically has resulted in an increase in the overall contribution with some sites, and this should be given considerable weight. In line with paragraph 14 of the NPPF, it clearly indicates development should be restricted in this situation. Not reassessing these sites, therefore, and including all allocations would therefore make it unsound. I do agree with some of the points made by other members. Our towns are failing, and regeneration will improve that in the main hubs, which is why the purpose of stopping urban sprawl and protecting the countryside is so important, because regeneration also ticks the reduced vehicle box, whereas expanding a town more and more on the outside edges is only going to increase that, which, like I said, is totally against the policy. You know, so this Greenbelt Review update is so imperative in the fact that it's highlighted the importance in regards to all these aspects. And, you know, what is the point of doing a Greenbelt Review update if you're not going to allow it to inform your plan and inform your sites? And that is why we do need to take into consideration all the other factors of trends, you know, the fact that the housing needs in North Herts has decreased a few times now, the fact that housing market sales only increased because of stamp duty, and this is slowing already. You know, all of these things need to be now taken into account in regards to this Greenbelt Review update. So I would like to say, on behalf of all the residents, Save North Harn Greenbelt, please reassess these sites offering significant contribution in line with other contentious issues. And as I have shown evidence, GA2 does need to be removed from the plan, as it's simply, the harm is greater than the benefits. I think that's it. I think I've probably rambled. I do apologise. I probably got lost. I'll probably go back later and go, I've missed something. Sorry.
No, well, if it helps, I fully understood everything that you said.
Thank you, Inspector.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to take our morning break. If you can, please remember to switch off your camera and to mute your mic. It's now 10:41. I adjourn the hearing to resume at 11:10. Thank you. Okay, it is now 11:10, and so I resume the hearing. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do, I can see that a few people have got their hands up. What I'm going to do is to take Mr. Griffith's suggestion one step further, I think, and consider first of all each of the strategic sites one by one. Now, obviously, I have heard quite a bit about some of them already, and there's obviously no need to repeat that. Could I ask, could you only keep your hand up, please, here to talk about site BA1. So I'm going to look at BA1 first of all. Okay, so no one, as I have it, is here to say anything further about BA1. So, okay, thank you for that. I'll go next then to the east of Luton sites. Clearly, I've already heard quite a bit about those, and again, there's no need. In fact, I won't hear any repetitious points. But okay, I have Mr. Dorman first of all.
Thank you, Mr. Barclay. Yes, just a brief point. Ms. Cotier mentioned in her statement that if there was such a thing as significant plus for the east of Luton area, that's what it should be. There is a prospect that that is going to be a possibility. I don't know if you are aware, but the Chilterns Conservation Board has been evaluating a proposal to extend the boundaries of the Chilterns AONB from the north further south to the east of Luton and across the countryside to the east towards
I am aware of that, and if I recall correctly, and do correct me if I've got this wrong, but as I understood it, that proposition is currently lodged with DEFRA.
Yes, in fact, this may help. I've had an update in the last few days from the planner at the Chilterns Conservation Board. It is lodged with DEFRA. DEFRA and its agency, Natural England, apparently have an issue with resource to be able to do it. But more to the point is that they, the recommendation is that the Chiltern, yes, they're looking at and waiting for the government's response of the Glover review on protected landscapes. And one of the recommendations of that review was that some existing AONBs, including the Chilterns, could be considered as future national parks. And this would inevitably mean, he says, looking at the boundaries because the reasons for designation are different. And whether that would therefore include east of Luton is open to discussion, he said. He adds a personal view that he thinks the small bit of designated AONB east of Luton does not do the character of the landscape of that area serious justice, and consideration needs to be given to the contribution that area could make in terms of nature recovery and the physical and mental well-being of the citizens of the rapidly expanding towns around it, including Hitchin and Harpenden, as well as Leeton and even as far as Stevenage. I think they're also waiting to see whether there's anything more coming out of the Prime Minister's statement about his green economic recovery, and apparently there's going to be some announcements early next year about the process for increasing the amount of land that it's protected, either as AONB or national park. That's the latest update I have on it, and I think that could well be of relevance in this instance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dorman. Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson? I can see that your hand's raised, Mr. Wilson, but I can neither see you nor hear you. Right, okay. I don't know if there's some sort of technical problem there or precisely what. If you can hear me, Mr. Wilson, I'm going to go next to Mr. Beglin, and if you do have a technical problem of some sort, if you can address that, and I'll come back to you. Mr. Beglin.
Thank you, sir, and good morning. First of all, sir, conscious that we have to stay, first of all, on topic, and secondly, that you are keen to avoid repetition, can I just draw you back to what Mr. Bedford said to the examination yesterday, just about 10:05 on my time markings, because the points that he made yesterday apply with equal force to the specific questions that you have identified for us today. But the position of Luton Council is that the headline point is that there is no reason in soundness terms to reject or even to revisit the allocation of the east of Luton as a result of the Greenbelt update material. And as Mr. Hal Williams said, he finds himself in general alignment with Mr. Bedford and what he said yesterday, and I am happily in turn in general alignment with what he said today. And so you have most of the detail in our hearing statements, which I won't rehearse. The references for what I'm about to say are also all within that document. And so I don't want to repeat at any length what has already been said by others or what was said by us yesterday. But one of the things we have established through the examination is that you will go back to all the hearing statements in your leisure time, so to speak. So I will confine myself for today to 11 short bullet points, and I hope they are helpful. First of all, as matters have in fact turned out, the Greenbelt update was an unnecessary update for the reasons that Mr. Bedford explained yesterday. It was primarily based on a perceived need, itself reliant on a Court of Appeal judgment, which has now been reversed, as we know. So to answer some of the points being made earlier about what the point of the assessment was, the point of the assessment was primarily to deal with that judgment of the Court of Appeal, which has now been substantially removed, indeed reversed, in terms of the equation that is before you. So that's the first point. The second point, again, as we said yesterday, is that our view is that the existing evidence base in CG1 is a proportionate and robust evidence base. And of course, those are the watchwords in terms of the sufficiency of evidence for the purposes of this examination and sustaining the submitted local plan. And I would suggest that one of the ways you can test that is by reference to the lack of real change in the analysis and conclusions in the updated material, which have nevertheless led to a change in the ultimate conclusion that North Arts have drawn in relation to the east of Luton parcel. The third point, as was pointed out earlier, is that in fact CG1 already expressly considered the visual attributes of the Greenbelt land that we are concerned with. And the fourth point is that none of the fundamental underlying reasoning has changed, nor has the applicable planning policy changed. And as others have quite rightly drawn attention to, my fifth point, nothing on the ground has changed. That's another important part of the background and context to the analysis. So then looking at what has happened in the update in just a little more detail, first of all, the explanations that are contained and set out in terms within the update supporting the overall assessment of Parcel 2 in ED 161B remain the same. My seventh point is that the assessment in relation to the Greenbelt purpose of safeguarding the countryside, which is the only...
My apologies. If you could reset and restart at your seventh point.
Of course. Seventh point, moving on from the explanations in the overall assessment, is to the assessment of the safeguarding of the countryside Greenbelt purpose, which is the only purpose subjected to the refined methodology within the update. That also remains the same in relation to Parcel 2. And as was also pointed out earlier, that truth also applies to virtually every sub-parcel contribution to Greenbelt purposes made by the land at the east of Luton. There is only one very limited exception to that. So the substantial picture, even when we look at the sub-parcels, remains the same on analysis. So my ninth point is to suggest that whether or not you reach a view that the updated material is generally robust, that first of all doesn't answer actually the question about whether or not the existing material was sufficient and proportionate to support the local plan, because both can be true. But secondly, it is not robust in relation to the change in the ultimate conclusion in relation to the east.
My apologies. If you could, yes, just bear with me a moment.
Of course. Sorry, it's trying to watch the virtual pen.
Yes, Zoom doesn't offer that facility.
No. we need that in a later upgrade for the examination process.
Okay, yeah, so my note goes as far as your point about whether or not the update is robust. The original review was also robust, and you made the point, I think, that both can be robust.
Indeed, but what we say is that it's plainly open to you to form general conclusions about the material, both the original and the updated, but then you will look more closely at the specific reasoning dealing with each of the proposed allocations. And we say that it's open to you, and you ought to conclude that even if you think that the updated material is generally robust, it is not robust in relation to the east of Luton for the reasons that were explained yesterday, this morning, and now. And when we go back to see the very limited changes that have actually been made in the analysis that have led to what on the face of it appears to be a potentially significant change in the conclusion, it illustrates what we would suggest is an important difficulty or risk with over-reliance on changes of this kind, where there is no change in the fundamental underlying facts on the ground, policy, assessment, or anything of that nature. And it's a risk that is inherent in the use of a banding system. So, for example, you can have circumstances where a site might fall towards the top end of a lower band within the assessment system, and someone may reevaluate on quite a limited basis, and that may take you just to the cusp or just over the cusp in relation to the next level of assessment. And that is an inherent weakness in the banding scheme, so which you'll be well familiar with in terms of general.
Give me, Mr. Beggan.
Yes.
My fault. I'm sure I didn't quite follow that.
So if there's a banding system that's in place, the nature of any banding system is that an assessment can be made about a site, and it might fall within, to take the moderate harm designation, it might fall just at the start of moderate harm, it might fall in someone's judgment midway into that boundary, or it might already be quite close to the cusp, where a small change or re-evaluation could lead to one going over into the next category. That is in the nature of a banding system, and it is something that affects sustainability appraisals as it affects this system. And what it leads to is a risk that where there are comparatively minor changes in any of the underlying material which lead to a re-evaluation, which as far as we can tell from all of the text that's in front of us, has been done on a fairly modest basis. What one needs to be careful about is over-reliance on a judgment that a site may have, as it were, just slipped from being in one category, perhaps just close to the cusp of the next category, but nevertheless into the next category. Now, the narrative that's contained in the Greenbelt analysis doesn't allow you to look at these things with that degree of refinement. So in order to avoid the risk of overstating the impact of this change, it is important to bear that in mind when you do the overall balancing exercise in relation to exceptional circumstances. If you accept North Hart's analysis in relation to this, then yes, there has been a change in relation to the band, but that is simply one of the features that goes into the overall balance on exceptional circumstances. And I need to be very careful not to trespass into areas where you have been quite clear you don't want to go today. But it is, of course, a matter of record that even on the basis of the changes that North Harts are now promoting to you in the evidence base, they continue very clearly to say that the East of Luton satisfies that overall assessment of exceptional circumstances. And so that's an important point to bear, we would say, in the front of your mind when you come back to considering your question, which is, are the changes in this study such as they require essentially sites that were within the submitted plan to be now rejected because of this change in the evidence? And I've gone slightly off piece there, sorry, in my response to your question. But coming back to my point, so my last point is adopting what Hal Williams said this morning in relation to not having a starting assumption that land that is close to the border of the existing urban areas will necessarily make the most significant contribution in Greenbelt terms. I'd say that that is an important thing not to assume. But if you look at the plans that have been provided, the figures that are provided in the update, one of them may assist you with how the council has gone about this process. And on page 19, this is an additional reference to the ones that are in our hearing statement. Page 19 of that update document, figure 4.4. If you look at that, you will see that this is the basis upon which the council, North Harts Council, have proceeded. And what it leads to, as figure 4.4 very neatly demonstrates.
You'll bear with me just one moment.
Okay.
Right, okay, yes, I'm looking at figure 4. In fact, can you bear with me just a little longer?
Of course, page 19.
As I need to bring to hand a fresh notebook. Okay, yeah, I have figure 4.4 to hand.
So, sir, if you look at that, what that's dealing with and seeking to summarise is the overall contribution to Greenbelt purposes. And it's just a helpful diagrammatic illustration of the fact that adopting the approach that North Harts have done for this analysis, you can see that those areas which make the greatest overall contribution to the Greenbelt are largely, the preponderance of the land is around the existing urban edges. And if that is a part of the analysis in relation to Greenbelt land, it's important just when you come back to the exceptional circumstances case to recognise what an almost inevitable counterpoint of that is. And that's that it will give a higher value to those pieces of land that in terms of general sustainability principles, putting the Greenbelt on one side for a second, are inherently likely to have higher sustainability characteristics. And that is certainly the case, as we say, for the East of Luton, for reasons that have already been canvassed and which I don't repeat. But the other corollary that appears from figure 4.4 is that if you, as it were, place too much weight on the contribution that those sites are making simply by virtue of their appearance adjacent to the urban form, then the risk that presents itself in terms of the distribution of land and spatial strategy is a leapfrogging, for example, into the white area of land that you can see on figure 4.4, which is of course still greenbelt land in relation to the proposed plan. And yet one can see, as a matter of planning logic, is likely to have adverse sustainability credentials in other respects. So if that point about there being an assumption or some normal level of increased weight to some of the greenbelt purposes simply as a result of them being adjacent to the urban area, one needs to recognise what the sustainability implications of that are, because they are also capable of being highly relevant to the overall exceptional circumstances balance. See the passages within the case of Compton that Mr. Bolton directed you to yesterday. And so when you take all of those matters together, it may be clear why, on the basis, and again, I don't rehearse the facts behind it, but on the basis that there is a clear need for North Herts to make the contribution it has agreed to Luton's housing, and for that to happen as close to where the needs arise as can sensibly be achieved, can sustainably be achieved, then the benefits of, as it were, not rejecting the East of Luton proposition are very clear in sustainability terms. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Beglin. Yeah, Mr. Beglin, I should probably ask a question of you that I put, I think it was to Mr. Williams. So if I were to consider the update, the Greenbelt Review update to be robust, including in relation to the East of Luton sites, would that conclusion, in your view, be irrational or unreasonable?
Sir, yes, no, I have taken the mute button off. So I will give the same answer as was given earlier. We would not suggest that that would necessarily be an error of law in itself. These are primarily matters of planning judgment for you to decide. But what I would say by way of additional observation is to go back to what I said earlier, that the fact, as it were, that you might conclude that this study is robust doesn't actually take away from the primary test in front of you, which was the material preceding it robust and proportionate, in which case it was already sufficient to meet the tests of soundness in the plan. And as I've indicated, we would say that a very good way of testing that is to look at what are really very minor differences to the actual analysis that has taken place in this further update. And so we say that that's a good yardstick to use for those purposes. And then ultimately, what we would invite you to do is come back to your question in the way that it's framed, which we would say is exactly the right way of framing this question. Is there a reason in soundness terms to reject what is a proposed allocation as a result of that update? And we say no.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. Hawkins.
Good morning, Inspector. I wanted to make a general point, if I may, please, in relation to some of the comments that are being made by the various barristers that are collected within the meeting this morning. Whilst I appreciate that at the previous EIP, the subject of openness became a factor which then precipitated the delivery of the new Greenbelt Review, which everyone's now saying needn't have been done because that particular Sam Smith case was overturned in the Supreme Court case, in the Court of Appeal. So fully understand that, but I do still believe that there is a relevance to visual impact, which still needs to be taken account of. And I have some concerns over, especially within the growth villages, as our team have made, I think, quite clear during the process of this particular EIP, that the growth villages will be suffering considerably from a number of the sites that have been selected. And so we obviously would like to propose, and we have done previously, Inspector, that these particular sites are removed from the actual plan itself, which takes away a great deal of that particular problem. I have a real issue with regard to where we started from, and I don't want to go back to the beginning and all that. I realise that we've done a huge amount of work getting the plan to this particular point. But there is a document called HOU1, which on page 14, I believe is misleading. And I'm referring to points 4.22 and 4.23, which refers to the SCHLAR outlined in section 3 and a total of 115 specific sites remaining. There's been a huge degree of obfuscation in the way that this plan has come together over a number of years. And I believe my colleagues have made reference to the fact that sites have been called different names at different times. So in our group, we basically put together a spreadsheet that sort of tried to map it from one site to another. So forgive me if some of my numbers are slightly inaccurate, but I'm trying to be as accurate as possible when I propose my concerns to you at this point in time.
If I can, forgive me, if I could just ask you to pause there, just for a moment, because I'm wanting to focus. I mean, obviously, what I'm talking about this morning is about the change in the assessment. So currently, what I'm doing is taking, first of all, the strategic sites one by one, and hearing points about that. I mean, I have noted your point there about visual impact, which is, as you say, was as a general point, and that would apply everywhere. So that's fine. I have that. I'm currently, I've looked at site BA1. I'm currently looking at the east of Luton sites. I'm then going to go to GA2, then to LG1, and then to NS1, those being the strategic sites. Then, having done that, to look at non-strategic sites where there has been a change in the assessment. So, as I say, I'm currently looking at the east of Luton sites, and I want to focus comments just on those for the moment. I'm not sure if you're going to go to those sites specifically, or whether what you want to say is a bit more general than that. I mean,
it's entirely general, Inspector. It's just that the clauses 4.22 and 4.23, I've read them dozens of times. I've had other people read them. They don't make any sense in terms of the total number of homes that are being requested within this local plan. In 4.22, we refer to 14,420 homes. Of these, 11,857, or 82%, are on sites currently within the Greenbelt. And in 4.23, it says, taking into account completions, permissions, windfalls, and broad locations, a maximum of 6,343 homes could be delivered on non-Greenbelt sites. When I subtract 6,343 from 14,420, that doesn't leave 11,000 homes to be provided within the Greenbelt. I make the point because obviously at the end of the day, we have been trying to be specific about a number of the details that have arisen during the course of this examination. And I just would like you to be aware of that issue, and perhaps the council can give us an answer at some stage. My apologies if I've strayed, and I will come back later.
Okay, thank you. So on the change in the assessment then on the east of Luton sites, Ms. Cottier.
Thank you. I want to respond to a point made by Mr. Bagelin, that he said the setting or the basic context of the setting has in no way changed since the first study. And I have to say, I strongly, categorically didn't object to that. That is an absolutely, completely untrue statement. I cannot stress that enough. I have been in correspondence with the planning officer at Luton Borough Council, and we have had a long debate, which is all in writing, if I need to produce it, that the planning application that is on the area of land and straying over onto EL1 and 2, well, EL1, let's say, because EL2 is the one bit further up. EL1 is absolutely not only the DCO, future DCO. There is an absolutely existent pre-approved planning application with works already underway, associated work on all connected to that entire land area that was approved 2 and a bit years ago and is an absolutely obvious change that cannot be denied, albeit they have tried to downplay it and merge it and hide it within the DCO. And within their documents, where I sourced my map from, the development and the construction reports, there is something on the EL1 site that I have never heard of before, but you may be familiar because it's a term that comes from the planning inspectorate, and it's detailed in the development and construction report document with, on page 44, where it gives the details of the parts of the map. The map is figure 3.11. And they've got something called the Rochdale envelope. I don't know if I've never heard of that before, but I looked up the term and it appears to be some kind of provision made by the planning inspectorate for, this is called the Rochdale envelope. Those are the exact words taken from the document itself. And when I looked it up,
It's not a term I'm familiar with.
no, I've never heard of it either, but it's the Rochdale envelope. I looked up what the hell is a Rochdale envelope, and there was a big page from the planning inspectorate saying that it's to do with when you encase some type of project, but you're not going to disclose the specific nature of the project at this stage. That's the basic idea of it. And it seemed to relate to some kind of court case that happened, Rochdale versus someone else. And then there was this provision made from it, the Rochdale envelope. That is on the EL1 site. And that is clearly marked. Several cases of Rochdale envelopes. There's 2 buildings surrounded by this quote, Rochdale envelope, on EL1 site. And that is referenced. I'll give you the exact, if you want me to give everybody it now, I'll give it now, the page number and the document source. It's in the development and construction report of Luton Future, which also contains the information about the associated works. And it's the associated preparatory works. The preparatory works are not within the DCO. It's an entirely separate stage of the planning process that they have passed in advance of the DCO to facilitate and almost front load the DCO. And that has already been passed, and it's not going backwards, it's moving forwards. And the associated works, as far as the highway improvements, have already been underway for over a year. They're all detailed in this, and this Rochdale envelope is on the EL1 site. And they're digging up the park next to it. There's a green, you see the green belt, and then there's a big county wildlife site that's within the green space park that they are digging up as part of this and replacing with car parks and roads, which will then, they hope, support their DCO application. But they're doing all of that first. That's not a future maybe. That's already happened. But what they've done is they've buried it within, and I've had extensive, I wouldn't say arguments with the planning officer, but I have pointed out what I see as reasons why it's a nationally significant infrastructure project and should have been included in the DCO. It has categorically changed the situation on the ground. It cannot be denied. And it happened, by the way, as Councillor Levitt's own letter was dated August 2018 in response to this earlier planning application, meant 2.25 years ago. So it's not like the original Greenbelt review when that was all being looked at. This wasn't going on. It was, but maybe they hadn't, well, they took the decision 2.25 years ago. So yeah, the consultation had been running for about 1.5 years prior to that as well. So how this was ignored, and now whether or not the what the Rochdale envelope includes is definitely not hedgerows, because it's occurring around buildings that exist on that site. And when I looked at the plat development and control document, it seems to say that it's something to do with possibly the construction, storage of, maybe you'd have to read the document. There's so much to this. The pages of these documents are probably like 900 pages in total. They're very, very detailed. And they're detailed for a reason, and they're very thorough. AECOM undertook these studies and the reason I know AECOM undertook the studies was because I registered the whole area as I began the process of registering the area, the ward, as a neighbourhood planning area, and I had a consultation and a technical package delivered to me as to how this would go about. And the problem was that they said if there's airport development going on, you can't register that as a planning area. But I said, no, it's not a DCO. It's under the Planning Act. It's not being done on. It's under the Town and Country planning provisions. It's not under the Planning Act as a DCO. They put it in as a major development to the local authority directly and have approved it. So it doesn't fall outside the scope of neighbourhood planning. And I was initially awarded a technical package by AECOM, but I had a conversation with the woman at length for about 2 hours on the telephone, and she had to call me. She was really excited to go ahead with it. And then she had to call me and they said, no, there's a conflict of interest because there's already a project going on where they are involved. And she said, I'm really sorry. I really feel sad. I really felt inspired. I wanted to go ahead with this. And I got given another company who was involved in, actually, interestingly, the Eden project in Somerset. They helped lay the initial foundations for the Eden project. And so he talked about it and I said, no, this is a deviation from the departure of the local. That's the other point. This whole project is a departure from the local plan, and it was advertised as a departure from the local plan in the newspaper. There was a consultation for it. And the consultation, the Chiltern Board, Lucy Murphy of the Chiltern Conservation Board is also aware of this and can back me up on this, because she was the one that pointed it out to me, that the deviation from the local plan consultation was running in relation to the access roads for this major development on the park. And they passed the planning application for it prior to the ending of the consultation for the departure of the local plan. And I have to just finish by saying that the guy that delivered the technical package to me in the end, he used to be the director for, he was the director for the, what did he say it was? So, I'll find out what it was, but it was something. Oh yeah, he wrote the roadmap to that was it. He wrote the roadmap, the plain English guide roadmap to neighbourhood planning. He actually wrote it, and he said to me that, of course, that was unlawful. That was unlawful. And I said, well, what am I going to do about it? They can't make a planning. They can't decide a planning application on a green space next to a proposed housing estate that's also and it's a departure from the local plan, and then and he said, well, you have to go to the ombudsman. I said,
Yeah.
they don't really do anything except take a complaint. I absolutely cannot stress enough how confused I am that he can sit there and say nothing has changed on the ground. That's my perhaps too emotionally made point, but it makes me very cross to think that he's saying nothing has changed on the ground when he's departed from his own local plan relating to the exact area.
No, that's
not true.
That's fine. And for my part, there's nothing wrong with a bit of emotion. These matters are emotional to people, and I fully understand that. But yeah, so your point there being that in your view, Mr. Beglin got it wrong in terms of the context, the on the ground context. That's the main sort of thrust with detail and hanging off it as well.
Wrong is a mild word for how far away what he said was from actual truth and reality. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, sir. Just to come back very briefly on East of Luton and what Mr. Beglin has said. I don't think the review was unnecessary. It certainly helps us. It helps you in terms of the planning judgments that you have to make. I'm rather surprised that Mr. Beglin was making these points, because he would know that in the Welwyn Hatfield local plan, the inspector there was very concerned about the harm that might be caused to various areas of Greenbelt. And he called for an additional Greenbelt review. He called for a green gap study to look at the areas between the main towns and villages in the A1 corridor. And there was a landscape sensitivity study, which has helped, I think, the inspector and the whole process, as a result of which those issues are now going to be considered as part of main modifications. So I think it does help you, this. It may come to we may differ on the conclusions which it comes to, but nevertheless, I think it helps you enormously. And in terms of what Mr. Williams and Mr. Beglin have been saying about the points about the impact being next to towns, and yes, it would be, wouldn't it? I think there are two processes at foot here. In the Luton case, I think the study and the Greenbelt review have been looking at in terms of the expansion of Luton and the encroachment on the open countryside. So that's Luton expanded.
Forgive me, Mr. Griffiths. I think that when you're saying review, you mean the review update, don't you?
I do. So review update. Okay. So
there is obviously another document that is the review. So I just want to make sure that you have in mind the right one.
Are you? And I think that's the origin of the issue that we've got here, has been the subject to this more detailed review that we've got in the GBRU. Now, in other parts of the district, in the A1 corridor, the origins of the issues come from the fact that one of the purposes of Greenbelt is to prevent the coalescence between towns. And I think that's why you, surprise, surprise, you've got these various issues of significance which are next to the towns. And that's it's coming from two different places. So I think that's my view on this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. Mr. Bolton.
Just very quickly on that. The review here was, I would suggest, quite different from the review in Welwyn Hatfield. For some of us, we might say unfortunately, for those probably fortunately.
Just go around, sorry, forgive me. just for the avoidance of my doubt, are we talking about the review or are we talking about the review update?
The review update, so yes, you made that point, I should have picked it up. So the review update here is different from the review that Mr. Griffiths was talking about in Welling Hatfield. There, the inspector was considerably concerned with some of the judgments that had been made with regard to green belt impact, both in terms of sites included and sites excluded. The peer review that was required actually wasn't undertaken, but what did result from that, because the inspector was correctly looking at a significant market uplift above that which the council had planned for. So part of the review did look at the potential of additional sites. The officers did recommend a number of additional, interestingly, smaller, more immediate sites to be included in the plan as part of, if you like, that review process. And that was rejected by members, but of course it's ongoing. So I think quite different, because the background to the review between the two districts was different. Here it was to take into account the judgment and the impact, if you like, of the visual assessment, and that wasn't the case in Welling Hatfield. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking to move on from the east of Luton very soon. I have Mr. Williams and Ms. Cottier wanting to come in with final points on the east of Luton change in assessment. Mr. Williams.
So my interjection is in fact more directly related to the matters to which Ms. Cottier referred when seeking to deal with submissions made by Mr. Beglin. It also is related to the document that has, I think, now been put on the examination website, answering your question, your request for maps in relation to the boundary of EL1 and EL2 as it relates to the DCO airport boundary.
Okay, so just so everyone's aware, so yes, I have received those. I have started to look through them, but by no means completed looking through those documents.
Well, that's very helpful, sir, and it may be that you'd like to defer this conversation until you've had a better time to deal with it. The short point is that we are concerned about the document that Ms. Cottier has put in. You will have seen that the documentary references are essentially to consultation documents and preliminary environmental assessment documentations, including scoping documents. And it's entirely normal, bearing in mind the stage that the proposal is at. We had provided maps, I think 3, with a very short, 4 maps, a very short note, half a page, I think, barely that, to help you understand the maps. However, Ms. Cottier has provided a very long, a very detailed document, in large part relying on internet links and including her own annotations and commentary as she has provided those links and those maps. The concern is here that first, with great respect to her, she has gone well beyond your request, which was for maps that should be clearly labelled. Secondly, what is in the document by way of content has the potential to mislead, and certainly there is, having had a look at it ourselves, a large amount of confusion and confusing statements and references. And thirdly, sir, it's most unsatisfactory to provide for you as an inspector on this examination a large number of website links requiring you, at least it seems to be saying, certainly a request, that you should look at them and read what is said to be hundreds or thousands of pages. Forgive me, I can't remember the precise figure. In circumstances where no other party at the inquiry will be able to keep track of your consideration, let alone answer questions that you might have on the way. We had understood your request to be quite a simple, straightforward one, and we had sought to answer it in what we believed is a clear way. But what you are now given is a document which, far from helping with clarity on that issue, serves to obscure the true picture. I'm sorry that was a long way of introducing my point, which was we do look to you, sir, to help us help you. We're concerned that if you're left with what you're left with, we won't know whether or not you're confused, whether or not you have a fair and accurate picture, and we're troubled for the three reasons that I've given. We think it's possible that we could provide, again, a very short note. Indeed, at the moment I've been given instructions that there's one extract from one document, the scoping report, which sheds considerable light on the many of the points that are made. It may be that Luton Borough Council feel that they can assist us on any matters of fact that they think are worthy of clarification. But in truth, sir, we look to you to help us help you. And what we don't want to do is, to be honest, waste your time. And in particular, we don't want to leave you with anything that has the potential to mislead you.
Yes. Well, on that, I'm not in the habit of being misled, but you have the advantage of me in that, as I said, I haven't looked through these documents yet. In essence, I've opened an email, seen that there's quite a lot of documents, and not had time to look at them. Very little more than that. Look, for my part, I don't want to take up any hearing time on that particular point that you raise and the concern that you raise. I think it's best probably for me, first of all, to actually see those documents and to decide what to do once I have. Either way, I would say that if I do require anything else from anyone else, I think that that's something, unless you think otherwise, Mr. Williams, but certainly I'm of the pretty firm view that that can all be dealt with in writing if indeed there needs to be any further points made at all.
Yes, sir. Well, we're very much in your hands as to that. So, and as I say, we are at the moment, even now, still looking at this document.
Okay.
So I think, as you rightly say, we can only take it step by step, sir. And I think as you are at a disadvantage at the moment, I appreciate that. And we await to see your views about how best to deal with the matter and take it further forward to assist you, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. Were there any additional points from your side, Mr. Williams, on the East of Luton sites? Because my intention now is to hear from Ms. Cotier has her hand raised, but it's not my intention really to go back.
No, sir. Thank you for the opportunity, but with nothing further to add to our written and oral submissions on that.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Cotier, then just final points then on the East of Luton sites before I move on to site GA2. So the East of Luton sites then, and the change in the assessment.
Yes, thank you. I've provided sources for the maps. So my maps where I took them from is sourced to actual documents produced by the council. And I provided those sources. And then within those sources are explanations. And I've provided the chapter and the location where you can find these explanations. And the long list of URLs at the bottom that Mr. Williams referred to, who were put there to help you gain access easily to the sources. As to whether you want to read those sources is another matter entirely, but it just saved you doing long internet searches to try to locate them, because they are not easily locatable, possibly by design. So I provided them, but that's up to you whether you want to access them or not. But all of my information is taken directly from the source documents without interpretation from me. And I must add, without omissions or interpretation from me. And I've just looked up Rochdale envelope, which is the term used in relation to that map I provide, and relates specifically to the objects that have appeared on the map that are part of the overall application, but it's not clear as to whether it's the preparatory works or the DCO that it's relating to. However, I've looked up and I found this that might be looking, it's an advice note 9 called the Rochdale envelope. It's issued by the Planning Inspectorate. It's entitled Using the Rochdale Envelope. And it says this advice note explains the use of, quote, Rochdale envelope approach under the Planning Act 208. And then it goes on to explain it. And it seems to be something to do with delivering wind turbines. So I'm not sure that's the case, obviously, in this case it's not. But there is an energy centre that has been approved. So it may be it's something relating to infrastructure, and the planning application that the preparatory works relate to are is involving a energy centre, which appears to be located in near the more like the current terminal buildings. But there's also part of the DCO, a future DCO plan relating, well, they would like to include it in the current DCO, an energy pipeline. So it may be relating to preparatory works for some kind of storage facility for the energy pipeline that is going to be serving. You see how they've planned it is on that side of the park near this, where they've located the energy envelope, the Rochdale envelope. In the DCO plans, that's going to be the Airport Terminal 2 building. So that could be why the preparatory works the preparatory works are the already approved planning application, okay? And within them is, I said the other day, it's 11 parts. And one of those 11 parts is an energy centre. And they've put in brackets sui generis, which I understand to mean in a category of its own, one of its kind, in a class of its own, something like that. So it's sort of some kind of extraneous thing that is on its own. And then they've put the Rochdale envelope with it, which relates to infrastructure around the 2 buildings that are already on site EL1's corner. And then coming further down towards the park, there's some little kind of like more straight shapes that are boundary are coloured around in red. And those I think are going to be like little hedgerow clusters. But then behind that are these two large, big squares. And they are on EL1, but they are part of the DCO, but it's not clear because of they've kind of veiled it with the Rochdale envelope facility, they've called it. And they say this in that document, and that's why I gave the sources of the document, that it's this. But all I know from having scouted around last night, it relates to some kind of infrastructure project. And it would make sense that the pipeline has to serve the terminal building, which is going to be, they're basically pretending that they're going to be building a enterprise zone. But really what they've always done is they've just got they initially got the outline planning, and then they got the actual planning permission 2 years ago. And there were groups in the area that were saying to them, look, we know you're not doing an enterprise zone, we know you're doing terminal 2. And they're like, no, we can do the enterprise zone regardless of the outcome of the DCO. So we haven't done anything wrong. And there's been this kind of like thing going on. But regardless of that, the enterprise zone is a fixed thing. And the Terminal 2 building is going to be on that side, and that's where the Rochdale envelope starts. So make of it what you will. But all I can say is that is definitely something there. Whether it's the energy centre or something to do with the pipeline, which is going under the green belt, I don't know. And then there was one other thing I was going to finish up with, which is now slipped my mind, so it kind of been important. But that's the source documents are where you need to go to find out that. Oh, and it is definitely not possible for the housing development to be contained within the Rochdale envelope, right? It's definitely not possible. And the reason for that is the housing development, although housing developments can be considered parts of nationally significant infrastructure projects, once they're above a certain threshold size, that's not a facility that's allowed. So I looked this up. Can a residential development be a nationally significant infrastructure project and thus be attached to the DCO? No, because above 1,000 houses, it's past the threshold. So they brought that in recently, that, you know, to try, maybe you're building a big nationally significant infrastructure project or something, you want to kind of put houses for your workers nearby or something like that. It's not possible at the size of 1,000 plus more than 1,000 houses to do that. So it can't be argued that these objects on the corner of EL1 are something to do with landscaping or hedgerow or something like that. No, it's not that.
Okay, look, I'll have a look at all of that stuff in due course,
okay.
The documents that have been sent through to me. Mr. Williams, you have your hand up again. You're on mute, Mr. Williams, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. Yeah, sadly, it's not a legacy hand. It's a new hand. It's what I call my exasperated hand, sir. Because again, Ms. Cottier, with great respect, sir, is not giving you fully reliable, factual information, and my worry is that you are not going to have a clear enough picture. Please go and look at our maps, as you've indicated you would, sir. We would only, and I hope this is a reasonable request, that you give us the opportunity to finish our review of her document and hear your views or read them, so as we can properly gauge whether you need any further information. As I say, step by step, sir, because you know, we would be concerned simply to leave things there on current basis at the moment, and we'd like to have sufficient opportunity to consider whether we feel it's necessary to provide you with anything further, but having regard to your view when you've read the document.
Yes, I mean, look, like I said, I want to take up no more hearing time on the specific point. As I've said, I will look at those documents in due course, and frankly, depending on when I get the opportunity to do that, because clearly I am at hearings all day at the moment. So I will do that. Beyond that, if I look at what I have and consider that I need no more, then I think, Mr. Williams, we can leave it there, and you shouldn't expect to hear from me about it. But if I do require any further assistance, then clearly I will let you know.
Well, sir, thank you for that. As I say, and I do emphasise the point, we're still looking at the document ourselves, but the next step is to hear your views, sir. I hope that's a fair way of proceeding. I just don't want to leave it up in the air. That's not going to help either you or us, sir, I think.
Well, things aren't up in the air, and I don't know what you mean by hear my views.
Well, sir, at the moment, I say we've taken a quick look at this document. We are concerned about the material in it, and we are anxious to hear from you your views about any areas where you need further clarity. But we're also concerned to be sure that we're given the opportunity, having heard your views, of helping you in relation to particular matters that we are still seeking to read and understand with all the referent links. So I've referred, for example, to one passage from the scoping report, which does meet with a lot of Ms. Cottier's points, and I'm not sure why she hasn't referred to this part of the document, but she hasn't at the moment. She may well have done, but the document is quite detailed and it takes some time to go through it. But if she hasn't referred you to it, that might be, to be honest, the most helpful thing that we can do for you.
Yes, it's this issue that you're asking me to share my views, and that's what I'm unclear on, Mr. Williams. I'm not normally predisposed to sharing views, certainly if they are in relation to soundness, if that is what you're asking. I don't think it is, but I'm not quite sure what view it is you want me to share. If it's a view that, reaching a view on whether or not I need anything more from anyone else, then if I did think that if I do reach that conclusion, then as I say, I will make that known. You can rest assured. But I mean, aside from that, I'm not quite sure what you're driving at.
Well, I'm only driving, sir. It is whether or not that the facts that have been presented to you are true and reliable, and fully in order to fully inform you as to judgments that you will be making. That's the only point that we're concerned about, sir. You know, we're satisfied ourselves, but Ms. Cottier is driving at a point suggesting that there's some, I think at times she said that there's some sort of significant development relative to the airport taking place within our allocation site. Well, that's just not true. She's referred to Red Line area, and we've sought to draw attention to that, where that's hedgerow restoration. She's referred to some other works that are going on at some other location, which she says is going to have some effect. She's got yellow blobs all over the plans she's provided. And that sort of material, should you take it away, sir, is capable, I'm not saying it's intended to mislead, but it is capable of misleading you. And one or two further documentary reference may assist you to, frankly, to put the issue to bed. But I certainly don't want to irritate you, so I really am seeking only to ensure that this examination is, when it is given facts, are given the full facts and the true facts.
Yes, I mean, like I say, you know, I am at a disadvantage here. Ms. Cottier, you want to say something?
Yes, the links that I provided to the documents are not the scoping report. He made the point that you should look at, or I should have looked, or he should have looked, who should have looked at the scoping report. But I provided the links to the document that is part of that entire library. So there are numerous documents on the Luton Future technical documents list, and I took that map from one particular document called the Construction and Development Report. So I therefore provided the links to that document because that was the source. And that was what you asked me to provide, the source. My source was not the scoping report, although the document is probably in there too. I took it from the more detailed construction document, hence that was why I didn't give the scoping report as a reference. However, if you look at my list down the bottom, the scoping report is included in the links that I provided should you have wished to go for it. So I did give that link. And then the document where I have the, I've given you 3 sets of maps. I've given you one map that is the showing the area of the current DCO and the enterprise zone major development that is separate to that occurring already, or begin associated works to it and preparatory works occurring already within one map. Okay, and that was taken from the construction report. Then I provide you with additional maps of sourced from the examination library itself here, this examination library, of the boundary maps of the 3 sites, EL1, 2 and 3, taken from the document of this library here. I took it from that. They give the planning applications and then the maps. So I've taken it from that. And then at the bottom, what he's saying about these yellow arrows, all I have done is I have provided 2 arrows pointing to the corner of the boundary map of EL1 to show where that is the area where there appears to be an overlap. That's all I've done. I'm not saying take that map. That's to point you in the right direction. It's like it's a big site. So you're like, well, what piece of the site are we talking about? I'm saying it's this piece here, so that you can relate it to the overlap area, so you know where it is, locationally speaking. And that's all I've done. So I think it's really unfair to say that somehow I've tried to muddy the water or mislead or confuse, because I have merely cited from the actual documents themselves. And I think that the fact that they had these documents are actually extremely good. I don't like what they're proposing, but they are really high quality documents. I was pretty impressed. I mean, these guys have gone into everything. So I don't think it's fair to say that these guys don't know what they're talking about and they've put things in a document that are just misleading and not true. Well, they put it in their document. I haven't made up the map myself.
Yeah, sure. What I'm going to do is draw a line under that now, because that isn't this discussion isn't helping me at all. We're talking about documents that I haven't yet seen, so clearly I will look at those and I will, one way or another, let you know what I'm going to do. Ms. Ormsby.
So it was just in an effort to help on this. Obviously, you've got to read these documents, and no doubt you will read those very carefully when you have the time to do that. What I was simply going to suggest, in order to try and short circuit all of this, and rather than wait to hear for any views you may or may not have on that, which you might be reluctant to express for obvious reasons, what I suggest is, why don't you simply just ask Mr. Howell-Williams to put in a note to set out any concerns that he may have in relation to the documentation, and then you will have the benefit both firstly of Ms. Cottier's information, you'll have the benefit of Mr. Howell-Williams's a response to that, and then you can just reach a judgment in relation to it, and then that will be the end of the matter.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion, Ms. Ormsby. I will bear that in mind when I'm looking through the documents.
Also, I think what I'm suggesting is that you just invite Mr. Howell-Williams just to put in any response he may have. He can do that within 7 days, and then you'll have both documents, both sides, and then you can reach your own judgment in relation to it. And then there's no burden placed back on you in terms of having to come back and set out whatever views you may or may not have. Yes.
I'm going to think about it, and I'll come to a view. Thank you for the suggestion. Grateful,
just in an effort to be helpful, sir.
Grateful for that. Yeah, I will consider that and bear that in mind when I'm deciding what I'm going to do. Once I've read the documents, frankly, so that I know what I'm talking about. Mr. Williams, is that a legacy hand or is it a new one? You're on mute again, I'm afraid, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, sir. So it's a new hand, but only very shortly to say, so we would happily undertake to do that in 7 days. I can tell you now that it would be 1 or 2 sides with the relevant document. I've already been instructed that there's one document that would throw a great deal of clarity on the issue. And so we'd be happy to abide by that. It's much better that we should be sure that you've seen the relevant clarification document.
Okay, thank you. I think someone has a device switched on that very occasionally emits a rather loud ping. If that sounds like it might be you, could you please switch it off? Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Williams. I've noted that. And like I say, I want to look at the documents first, and I think that's the logical way to do it, to look at the documents and then reach my conclusion on what I want to be done, if anything. Good. Right. I'm going to move on now then to site GA2. Is anyone here to talk about GA2? Ms. Hamilton.
Just to finish off, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Finish off what I was saying earlier. Obviously, I have raised the point that I did put in a submission, which you can obviously take a look at in your own time, which does raise the majority of points, and it also highlights why we don't think this allocation should be left in. And I have highlighted to you previously how harm outweighs the benefits, and how the GBRU has highlighted the importance of some of these sites. In regards to this as well, it just it goes on the fact that it was already recommended, well, it was advised that NHDC had made a mistake when building the original Great Ashby, and that was due to the location and the environmental impacts, and that was based on the old Greenbelt review. So it's interesting to know that, you know, this new review has highlighted even more the importance. The fact that some of the many residents and some of the councillors and MPs have raised also concerns about that site as well, should be taken into account. I would like to point out that I think that I mentioned this, but no, I didn't, because COVID happened after our submissions. A petition has been running over the last few months due to the GA2 site and the importance of its countryside against the allocation reasonings, and that's going to be running until the end of the hearings. That is purely being signed by people that have used that site, and so I wanted to make you aware of that. I'm more than happy to send a link on to Miss Louise St. John Howe if that's appropriate, so that you can see the amount of community support for that area. I'd also like to raise one quick point as well. I don't know where to stick it, so I just raise it now and then it's done then. When a submission was made in February regarding this site, we did keep an eye out over the next 2 months for any response, and none happened. Last week I noticed a response has been put in, I think it was about 4 months later, and it has made sort of a few allegations and suggestions. I feel it is important in regards to this. It was made in response to my submission to you. I basically put in a submission on the 27th of February, and Elm Law has put in a response to that, but I don't think it went into the examination documents until May or June. And I feel it's important to clarify a few of the points on that, as it has a huge impact on this site in particular. Would I be able to put in a response to that and clarify these points via Ms. St John Howe, Inspector?
Sorry, when you say in February, was that, what is that? What are you talking about specifically there? I'm not
Okay,
clear.
so I put in a submission in February in regards to the GA2 site and the Greenbelt Review update and everything else. And a number of months later,
Was that it? When you say submission, was that your hearing?
Yes, hearing statement.
Right.
Yes, that's it. Yes, and Elm Law have put in a response to that, but it didn't appear within a couple of months after. So I only noticed it last week, and I just feel it's really important to clarify certain points. Would I be able to respond to that so that North Herts District Council and you are aware, or do you want me to bring it up next Monday?
The Elm Law, you say a response?
It was a response by the developers, ecological people. And it is quite important in relation to the allocation of that site being left in the plan. Otherwise, I wouldn't have raised it.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just
sorry.
No, I'm judging my memory. I do have a vague recollection of this. No, I mean, look, not really. You might be forgiven for thinking that this is a kind of forum where people can parry and riposte throughout. But that is not the nature of these proceedings. Believe it or not, this is actually about people telling me up front in their representations, in their statements, what they think. And I'm far more interested in what people think themselves rather than necessarily what they think about what other people think.
Yes, sir.
If you follow me. So
yes, sir. That's fine, Inspector. That's absolutely fine. If I just draw to my last point, then I've just, in response to the council's point 46 in their response to you, I would just like to point out that we did object to the allocations regarding harm to the Greenbelt on numerous occasions. I know they stated that they don't feel that people did, but we just wanted to highlight we did actually, we have in the past. So it's not just something new. So that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, sir. Just briefly about this particular area, including GA2. We can see on figure 4.9 in the review its location right on the edge of Stevenage. CPRE is particularly concerned about this. Now, we do support the conclusion of the review in that it does encroach severely into the open countryside on that edge of Stevenage. And if we look at the map on figure 4.9, you can see to the north that tract of countryside between there and Weston, composed of woodland and quite small fields. It's quite an intimate area of countryside. Of course, it's not in the Greenbelt, but I think the point is that development on that particular site in the Greenbelt would in fact encroach on the area of countryside beyond. So I think that's the point I would wish to make here, and certainly support the points that Ms. Hamilton has made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. I don't have then anyone else indicating for GA2. Mr. Griffiths, if you could pop your hand down, please. I think that's a legacy hand.
No, it's not.
Oh, you wanted to come back in having right?
No,
Okay.
no. It's gone.
Sorry, I'm not clear, Mr. Griffiths, if you'd finished your contribution or not now.
His hand's not there.
Right, it's gone now. It has gone now. Right, I'll assume, Mr. Griffiths, unless you tell me that you don't want to say anything further on GA2. That's correct. So he's got his real hands up now. Right. Okay. To cite then HT1. Is anyone here specifically to talk about site HT1 and the change in the assessment? Okay, thank you. Site LG1. Mr. Webb. You're on mute, Mr. Webb.
Is that better? Can you hear me, Inspector?
I can hear you now.
Good, thank you. As a result of the 2018 update, strategic site LG1 on strategic parcel 22 is now assessed as making a significant contribution to greenbelt purposes. This may be because of the fact that there is increasing encroachment of housing in Bedfordshire near to the Hertfordshire border. We support the reassessment because the degree of separation is being eroded at towns, villages, and smaller settlements to the north. So we fully support the upgrade of overall significance. If the council truly want to keep towns separated, Letchworth, which is located in the middle of a number of towns and villages, needs all the green belt that it currently has. Also, please note that development of site LG1 would cause the Greenway path to be moved northwards over the hill, and that would completely change the experience of cycling and walking around on the Greenway, of which we're inordinately fond. So, in summary, we think the update has reached the correct conclusion for LG1, and we hope that if a decision is taken to reduce housing need, strategic site LG1 is removed or shrunk considerably. Our answers to the questions in 23.2 are as follows. A, yes, to reject the allocation. And B, this is to underscore what Ms. Nikki Hamilton said this morning, the updated assessments of significance should be applied to the outcomes of allocation and safeguarding. Otherwise, it's unsound, the assessment. That's all, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Ms. Hamilton.
Just a quick one. Yes, I would support the Greenbelt Review update in regards to Letchworth. There has been numerous developments going on in Stotfold, Fairfield, and Arlesey, and it does question, you know, the fact that the demand in North Hertfordshire has decreased. We have phases of development that have halted because houses in the first phase haven't been sold. And basically, if all of the current plans go forward, because we're still seeing developments going in Olsey, which is northwest of Letchworth. Developments have already been approved there that have got to be built anyway. But if you were to see all of the plans going ahead under North Herts and Central Beds, I think you'd be literally looking at a couple of fields in between Letchworth, Stotfold, Olsey and Norton Green and Fairfield, which does put a considerable pressure on the countryside. So I would definitely suggest that maybe this site could at least be significantly reduced in line with that significant contribution. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Amis.
Hello. Yeah, it's just to seek a slight clarification, actually, because I'm looking at the original 2016 Greenbelt Review on page 60, where we break the various locations into their separate areas. And then comparing that to the update, the most recent update on page 22, it seems to come to the same conclusions, and there doesn't seem to be a difference. Now, I'm very conscious there are lots of different assessments throughout the reports. Both score the merging between neighbouring towns as moderate. So both the 2016 and more recent update score the merging as moderate, but they seem to come to the same conclusions. And I'm not sure. As said, I may be looking at the wrong table, but they both seem to conclude there is a significant contribution. So there's no issue with that in terms of the methodology. But it doesn't seem to be a change between the original and the update. And I was just a little bit unsure. But we just also wanted to highlight that both of those assessments do score the merger of neighbouring towns as moderate.
Thank you. Anyone else on LG1? Okay, thank you. Then site NS1. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, sir. Apologies for the technical glitch earlier. I'd just like to respond to some of the commentary earlier from Mr. Rigg in respect of NS1, which is land north of Stevenage, and it's adjacent to Stevenage when accounting for the Stevenage allocation to the south. We do not believe the increase in significance as a result of the 2018 Greenbelt Review should lead to the removal of allocation NS1. The council has taken a positive approach to selecting land for allocation and has applied the most sustainable spatial strategy. NS1 makes an important, significant contribution to the sustainability of the spatial strategy by virtue of its location adjacent to Stevenage. The preferred destination for those moving out of Stevenage is North Herts. There's a single housing market. NS1 is a strategic site adjacent to Stevenage. So the Stevenage local plan commits £3.5 million worth of investment to a mobility strategy for Stevenage, including considerable upgrades to the cycle network, which future residents of NS1 would have ease of access to and benefit from. NS1 is 500 metres from one of the largest employers in Stevenage, the Lister Hospital, and 2 miles from the furthest employment area to the south of the town, all of which are within a 15-minute cycle commute. It is evident from the Stevenage local plan that NS1 is situated in a highly sustainable location, which would provide ease of access to the strategic highway network. And crucially, future residents would benefit from the investment in mobility in Stevenage and reduce reliance on the car. The benefits to health, well-being and climate change are clear. Moving to the point around coalescence, NS1 is a strategic site, and the proposed policy wording requires landscaping and structural planting to provide integration into the surrounding landscape and a long-term defensible greenbelt boundary to the north. The revised policy wording would allow the council to secure this through a comprehensive and deliverable site master plan for the whole allocation prior to determination of the planning application. And they were my points to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Peters.
I think Mr. Rigg earlier made some interesting points in that NS1 is dependent on HO3 next door to it coming forth. If I might remind you about HS3, which I know a little bit about, sorry, HO3 that I know a little bit about. The outline planning application is being applied for, and the planning application is due next week on HO3. And my point is that it could be years that the amount of time could be years that HO3 comes forward, because there's a lot of opposition to it, including opposition from Stevenage MP and the MP from Hitchin and Harpenden, and also the MP from, I believe it's East Hertfordshire. So even if HO3 were to be found acceptable at outline planning application next week, they would still have to go through detailed planning to get detailed planning application. And at the moment, and we have talked about this before, that the market signals in relation to house building are down 35%. This is what Knight Frank are saying. New housing starts could be 40% of last year. Next year's housing starts will be 25% down on 2019. So there's, at the current time, there's not strong economic recovery. And this is my reasons for saying that it could be many years before HO3 could actually start, and NS1 is obviously dependent on that starting or being approved. So we do not know when it could be approved. There could be a judicial review, all sorts of things could happen on HO3. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Rigg.
Thank you very much, Inspector. In response to Mr. Wilson's comments, point I would make about the mobility strategy and the cycleways. The transport assessment made by HO3 indicates that the volume of a capacity on the road will be 85%. The addition of NS1 is going to significantly increase that volume of capacity to a point where we'll be approaching gridlock. And well, I've already submitted a couple of documents to you in ED, an extract from ED 109, where in points 1.1, 1.22, and 10.3.5, they both confirm. This is an ACOM review that was undertaken for Stevenage Town Council, which indicated extensive queuing, and likewise the ED 38, which I submitted. So to say that everything is rosy with the NS1 site and its impact on the locality is, I would suggest, incorrect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hamilton.
Okay, just quickly, I would just like to say, yep, as already raised, NS1 is reliant on NH1, and this could have an impact on the 5-year plan. The area is also heavily used by residents around that area of Stevenage. It's used by people of Gravely and by the residents that live in that part. I don't know what you class it as, North Stevenage, I suppose. And this has increased this year. There is a sort of with my Greenbelt hat on, I know that there is a slight environmental impact on this site. So should NH1 go through, enabling NS1 to do so, I would suggest at the very least that the site should be reduced, because it is going to have an impact on Gravely, and Gravely should be able to stay separate. And if the site was reduced, then the proposed country park to the east of the NH1 site could be carried around across the northern part, making a definite, permanent, forever buffer between these two sites and Gravely, which is really quite. Oh, did you get that?
I didn't get the last bit, Miss Hamilton. No.
Where did I get to?
No, you were talking about the country park to the.
Oh yes, going across to the northern side, so that there's a permanent buffer in between these two sites and Gravely, because Gravely does need to be kept in a separate entity and be protected in that way. And this would also give protection to this part of the countryside Greenbelt for the use of benefits of the residents, etc., and the environment, wildlife, biodiversity. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rigg, your hand is up. Is that deliberate, or have you just forgotten to put it down?
It's deliberate. In respect to Miss Hamilton's comments about keeping Gravely and Stevenage separate, or NS1, that the opportunity would exist with site 353 to create a 400-metre buffer between any development and the village. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You still have your hand up, Mr. Rigg. Thank you very much. Right. Yeah. Are there many people? Can I ask people just to sort of indicate by raising their hands if they're here to talk about non-strategic sites and the change in the assessment in relation to those? Well, I can see one physical hand. I meant thank you, Mr. Griffiths. Okay, Mr. Griffiths, Mr. Hawkins. Okay. I'm conscious that it's been quite a while as well since the council has had much in the way of an opportunity to reply. So I think I will now then take a break for lunch, which will hopefully give Mr. Smith a bit of breathing space as well to work out precisely what he wants to say. So yeah, it's okay. So I make it. It's now 12:54. I better just check. I think that we can we just turn our microphones off and switch our cameras off and simply stay in the meeting?
That's correct, Inspector.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. Thank you for that. Okay, so it's 12:54. Ms. Ormsby, is sort of 45-minute break going to be sufficient from your end of things?
Well, yes, I think so. Mr. Smith, is that sufficient, do you think?
I'm happy to take an hour if it would want to be fair to Mr. Smith.
No, it's fine. 45 minutes, and yes, we'll be ready to respond when we come back.
Okay. Well, in which case then I make it 12:55. I adjourn the hearing to resume at 1:45. Thank you.